Was I expelled from Hogwarts? Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction. So don't try any techniques you hear here in real life, your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 551 Shirley, Ralph, hit me. Ralph and Shirley stopped talking about Helena and went into the library. But as soon as they entered, they sensed something was wrong. It was so noisy. The library was usually absolutely quiet, even the slightest sound would earn you a death stare from Mrs. Pants. But today it was a chaotic mess, like a bustling market. A group of students surrounded the entrance to the forbidden section, clamoring to get in. Mrs. Pants, waving a feather duster, blocked them out, sternly shouting, "Get out of here!" Ralph and Sherry found Hermione in a corner of the library and sat down beside her. Sherry asked curiously, "What's going on?" Hermione, who was engrossed in writing, stopped her quill, looked up at the girl with the ponytail, and smiled. "Didn't Professor Moody talk a lot about dark magic in class? Those dark magic spells are only detailed in the books in the forbidden section, and they want to go in and look them up. If they want to get into the forbidden section, shouldn't they ask a teacher for an autograph?" Sherry asked, pulling out her homework. "By blocking them here, Mrs. Pants won't let them in." "That's true," Hermione said softly, shaking her tired wrist. "But no teacher will give an autograph." That was true. If you asked why she wanted to go to the forbidden section, she'd say she was going to study the Unforgiven Curse and, incidentally, the basic principles of the Fiend Fire Curse. Forget about getting a signature. The teacher might need to focus on the students' mental well-being and remind their roommates not to sleep too soundly at night. Without a signature slip, the students could only camp out in the restricted section, trying to persuade Mrs. Pants. But Mrs. Pants wasn't one to be trifled with. Wielding her feather duster, she used every trick in the book to drive the students away. The library finally quieted down. "If you ask me, Professor Moody should teach the magic in the textbook," Hermione said, clearly dissatisfied with Moody's teaching. She pursed her lips and frowned. Everyone's foundation is still very weak, and the textbook is the way to teach step by step. Is it really a good idea to expose everyone to dark magic so early? No, I'm going to write to Professor Moody and remind him to pay attention to this. Hermione's serious expression was a spitting image of a young Professor McGonagall. Ralph and Sherry exchanged a glance and couldn't help but laugh. Hermione couldn't hold back any longer. Her cheeks puffed out as she glared at the two of them, mumbling angrily, "What are you two laughing at? Write a letter with me." "I'm not writing. I think Professor Moody teaches very well." Ralph waved his hand, then glanced at what Hermione had just been writing. The girl quickly reached out to cover the parchment, but he had already seen most of it. "The most poisonous magic, deciphering the cutting edge of dark magic, the burning of the demonic fire, curses and the cursed." Ralph chuckled. "Hermione, you're against learning dark magic, so why are you borrowing so many books on it?" Hermione blushed. "I'm doing this to complete Professor Moody's assignment. Professor Moody is planning to have us all experience the Imperious Curse. If we don't learn about it beforehand, we'll definitely embarrass ourselves in front of the whole class." Ralph thought for a moment and said softly, "If you don't want to embarrass yourself, I can help." "How?" Sherry looked at the boy and suddenly realized. "You want to use the Imperious Curse on us?" "That's right," Ralph nodded. "I'll use the Imperious Curse on you first, and you can experience it and then resist it with your own will. After a few tries, you won't embarrass yourself in class." "How do you know the Imperious Curse?" Hermione exclaimed in surprise. "Didn't I tell you?" Ralph shrugged. 1,000 years ago, these spells weren't forbidden. Hogwarts even taught dark arts, and I studied with Hufflepuff for a while. "How was it?" Ralph looked at the two girls, his eyes full of amusement. "Want to give it a try?" Sherry nodded without hesitation and said softly, "Sure." Hermione narrowed her eyes, looking at the smiling boy, sensing he had ulterior motives, but she still hummed a few times and said, "Let's try it." Hermione asked again, "Are we practicing tonight?" "Not tonight." Ralph shook his head. "I'm busy." Hermione looked at Ralph suspiciously, thinking to herself, he's definitely going to the Forbidden Forest. The three of them did their homework at the table for a while, then left the library for the Great Hall for dinner. After dinner, they returned to their common rooms. As the dormitory lights went out, Sherry lay in bed, tossing and turning under the thin linen blanket, unable to fall asleep. The night was deep outside the window, and the soft sound of raindrops tapping on the glass only made it harder for her to sleep. After hesitating for a long time, the girl finally couldn't resist getting up, determined to go to the library for a quick look, just one look. She told herself this. Making sure her roommates were asleep, Sherry quickly put on her robes, casually tied her hair in a ponytail, picked up her wand, and tiptoed through the rooms in the castle, down the spiral staircase. Entering the Ravenclaw common room, a few embers flickered in the fireplace, casting a dim light that made the armchairs appear as dark shadows. "Where are you going so late, Miss Swinton?" a voice suddenly rang out from a dark corner. "Staying out at night will get you points deducted." Sherry jumped in surprise, immediately drawing her wand and pointing it towards the fireplace. The person laughed. "Sherry, don't attack, it's me." A figure stood up from the sofa, looking over with a smile. The girl was stunned for a moment, then exclaimed in delight, "Ralph, what are you doing here?" The boy didn't answer, but instead asked, "Aren't you sleeping in your dorm? Where are you going?" Sherry blushed, forcing herself to remain calm. "I came to check if the fireplace fire had gone out." "Sherry," Ralph blinked, "you always wrinkle your nose when you lie." Sherry blushed even more, staring at the boy, and asked again, "Weren't you going to find the Chamber of Secrets with Helena?" "What are you doing here?" "Waiting for you." Ralph laughed. "I said I'd take you with me. What if I hadn't come out?" Sherry asked. "I'm coming to your dorm to find you," Rove said with a bright smile. "I'll drag you out of bed." The girl with the ponytail bit her lip, staring at Rove with a mix of grievance and joy. Suddenly, she ran towards the boy and threw herself into his arms. The two fell onto the soft sofa, their arms intertwined, rolling around on the sofa several times. Rove held Shirley's soft, alluring body, sniffing her deeply, and said softly, "You clearly wanted to go, so why did you say you wouldn't?" Shirley hugged Rove tightly, resting her head on his shoulder, her nose against his neck, and murmured, "I'm sorry, is an apology enough? Don't do that again, understand? You're asking for it." Rove slapped Shirley's round, pert bottom lightly, sending a tingling sensation through her. The girl with the ponytail blushed crimson, her breathing becoming rapid. She tilted her head back, looking at Rolf, her eyes as hazy and dreamlike as a watercolor painting. She spoke clearly, each word distinct. "Rolf, hit me. There's no one else here." Shirley couldn't speak anymore, because Rolf had already silenced her with a kiss. Chapter 552 Library Mayhem. Rolf and Sherry lingered in the lounge for a long time before suddenly remembering Helena was waiting. They quickly left Ravenclaw Tower and headed towards the library. Sherry moved with light, nimble steps through the dimly lit corridor. As she stepped onto the stairs, she hopped and skipped like a little fox, radiating youthful energy. Her long absent childlike movements clearly indicated the girl was in a good mood. Reaching the top of the stairs, Shirley turned and gazed at Rove, pursing her lips and smiling, her eyes crinkling. She urged, "Hurry up. We're past our appointment with Helena, she'll be getting impatient." Rove remained unhurried, acting more like he was taking a late-night stroll with Shirley than keeping an appointment. He teased, "Getting impatient now? Who is that clinging to my neck on the sofa, refusing to let go? They almost strangled me." Shirley blinked, deliberately looking left and right, feigning ignorance. Who are you talking about? I can't see them." Rove walked over and gently pressed his hand on the ponytail girl's forehead to stop her from shaking her head. Shirley smiled sweetly, took Rove's arm, and nestled against him as they walked downstairs. The boy pulled a Hogwarts map from his pocket with one hand and said softly, "You can check if Helena is still in the library." Shirley hummed in agreement, took the map, raised her wand, and tapped it lightly with a tip, saying, "Allahumora." The previously blank parchment was now covered in fine, spiderweb-like ink lines that intertwined, and then cursive green lettering appeared at the top. Hogwarts Magical Map Creators, Ralph Scamander, Shirley Swinton, and Hermione Granger. This item belongs to Celia's Magical Beasts shop. "Well, is she still there?" Ralph asked. Shirley stared at the map, stunned for a moment, and said incredulously, "Ralph, it's not about whether Helena is there or not anymore. What's wrong?" Ralph leaned closer, glanced at it, and was immediately stunned as well. There were 8 or 9 names scattered throughout the library, and even small, moving dots in the distance, heading towards the library. Merlin, a group of students are out in the library in the middle of the night. Has Hogwarts gotten this bad? They're probably going to the forbidden areas to peek at the dark magic books, Shirley guessed. Probably, Ralph nodded. Since the professors wouldn't sign off on their trips, they had to sneak off at night. What do we do? Shirley asked. Come back in a few days. No, Ralph smiled at her and said, we'll tell Snape and Filch to go to the library and arrest them. Inside the library, Harry and Ron, huddled under an invisibility cloak, tiptoed into the forbidden section. They were stunned by what they saw. 7 or 8 students, each holding a glowing wand, were squatting on the floor, flipping through spellbooks. Some were even taking notes with quills. Harry rubbed his eyes and glanced at his watch, confirming it was 11 p.m., not 11 a.m. Unbelievable. It was even more lively here than during the day. Many of them look familiar, Ron said excitedly. That's Andrew Gert, George and Fred's roommate. That's Trey Young, a Ravenclaw student. I've seen him before. Although Ron lowered his voice, it was still very clear in the quiet restricted area, which aroused the dissatisfaction of those whose names were mentioned. Hey, you guys using the invisibility cloak. Is this your first time out at night? Trey Young frowned. Let me teach you a lesson. True brothers keep quiet when out at night. We're all gathered here tonight, so don't reveal anyone's names. And if you get caught, don't give anyone else away, understand? Harry and Ron fell silent, quickly shutting their mouths, and started searching for spellbooks in the restricted area with their wands. They weren't looking for the dark magic Moody had mentioned, but rather for books related to the scar. Harry's scar had been aching lately, and he wanted to check to see if there were any spellbooks in the restricted area that mentioned the Avada Kedavra scar. However, some of the books had no titles at all, and the gold lettering on others had peeled off, leaving only incomprehensible words. The two searched aimlessly, like headless flies, wishing they had a knowledgeable wizard nearby to help them. Just as Harry and Ron were about to split up, a familiar voice suddenly came from afar. Draco, there are so many people here, that's normal. After that old man Moody took those kinds of classes, a lot of students will definitely sneak over, Malfoy's affected voice rang out. As far as I know, Monta and Dree and Percy are coming tonight. Goyle, Crabbe, what kind of dark magic do you two want to learn? The Fiend Fire spell looks powerful, Goyle said. What's so great about that? Malfoy scoffed. If I'm going to learn anything, I'll learn the Imperius Curse. I've heard it can control people. Once I learn it, I'll control Harry Potter. What would you do with him? To toy with and torture him? Of course, Malfoy sneered. I can make Potter serve me like a house elf, lick my toes, or kneel down and call me dad. That would be so much fun. As for Potter's little sidekick, Weasley, you two can have your fun. Goyle and Crabbe laughed until they were shaking. Hearing this, Harry was instantly enraged. He slammed the hardcover book in his hand down on Malfoy's head. Thud, the corner of the book hit Malfoy squarely on the forehead, instantly causing a large, red bump. He screamed in pain, cursing, who did this? But no one answered, only the spellbooks responded. Malfoy raised his hand to shield his eyes and shouted, someone's wearing an invisibility cloak. You two grab that guy. Crabbe and Goyle frantically moved forward, stretching out their long arms and groping around like fools. Harry and Ron dodged around them, Harry even sticking out his leg. Crabbe tripped, his flat, large foot landing on the edge of the invisibility cloak. Harry and Ron felt a strong pull, and then the invisibility cloak slipped off them. Malfoy sat on the ground, wincing in pain, glaring at them and yelling, Potter, it's you. Fuck you. Malfoy also pulled a book from the shelf and threw it at Harry. The book opened in midair, emitting a piercing, chilling scream that echoed through the library. Harry dodged the attack and quickly slammed the book shut, but the scream didn't stop. It was a high-pitched, continuous, deafening sound. Taking advantage of the moment, Malfoy lunged at Harry, grabbing his little dragon tightly, and the two began to wrestle. The other night-sneaking students had already escaped the library, leaving only Harry, Ron, and Malfoy, still locked in their struggle. Let go, Harry cried urgently. Snape heard the noise and will be here in 2 minutes. If he catches us, we're all doomed. You let go first, Malfoy roared. I'll let go. Fine, a dog won't let go. Harry impatiently released his grip first, and Malfoy immediately released Harry as well. Harry thought he still had at least 2 minutes. If he acted quickly, he could still slip away. But when he turned his head, he was nearly scared out of his wits. Snape and Filch had already arrived, standing in the doorway, watching them. Filch, his back hunched, his chin trembling with excitement, huffed, "Oh ho! Fighting in the forbidden section so late. Good evening, Potter." Snape's expression was strange, as if he were desperately trying to suppress a laugh. He said slowly, "Come on, Headmaster Dumbledore should be asleep by now, but I think he'll be happy to get out of bed and hear your stories. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 553 Shirley, Helena, and Hermione. When the library quieted down again, two figures gradually materialized in the air. Ralph stood in the restricted section, gazing in the direction Harry, Ron, and Malfoy had disappeared, silently mourning for them for 3 seconds. Clearly, Snape would make them understand the consequences of being caught sneaking out at night and give them a small taste of the school rules power. Shirley, who had been staring at the Hogwarts map, suddenly exclaimed in surprise, "Ralph, Hermione's approaching the library." Ralph was also taken aback, glancing at the map with some skepticism. Sure enough, he saw her name, getting closer and closer to the library. The two didn't know why Hermione was there, but since it was her, there was no need for them to remain invisible. They simply stood quietly and waited. A moment later, footsteps sounded in the distance. Ralph turned to look in the direction of the sound and, sure enough, saw Hermione running towards them with a smile on her face, a smug look on her face as if she had successfully caught them in the act. Sherry asked softly, "Hermione, what are you doing here, with such a loud noise?" "Who wouldn't hear it?" Hermione laughed. "I came right away after hearing the sound." Ralph raised an eyebrow. "Don't tell me you heard the noise in your own dorm, got dressed, and got from Gryffindor Tower to the library in such a short time?" Then Hermione wouldn't be the know-it-all, but the Hogwarts Flash. Hermione grinned. "I've been near the entrance on the first floor. What are you doing there in the middle of the night instead of sleeping?" "To catch you too, of course." Hermione put her hands on her hips, raised her chin high, and snorted. "You said you were busy tonight. I knew you two would sneak off to the Forbidden Forest in the middle of the night, and I caught you, didn't I?" The girl shook her head, clicking her tongue, as if pleased with her own cleverness. Sherry chuckled. "You guessed wrong. We're not going to the Forbidden Forest tonight." "Not going to the Forbidden Forest?" Hermione looked at the two suspiciously. "What are you two doing here in the middle of the night?" "Ravenclaw left me a secret room, but after 1,000 years, the original entrance is gone," Ralph explained. "Helena knows where the other entrances are, and she arranged to meet me here tonight." Hermione said, "Oh," remembering that Ralph had indeed mentioned the secret room a few months ago when he talked about the 1,000 years. "What was that noise just now? Did you make it while looking for the entrance?" "No." Sherry pointed to the bookshelf. "Someone was fighting, and they knocked the spellbooks off the shelf. That's the sound they made, a fight in the library in the middle of the night." Hermione was stunned. She felt like she was listening to a ghost story. "Don't worry," Ralph smiled. "The students who were fighting have been taken away by Snape." Hermione's heart skipped a beat, a bad feeling rising in her heart. She quickly asked, "Were there any Gryffindor students?" Ralph and Sherry exchanged a glance, and the boy grinned. "I have 2 pieces of news, one good and one bad." "Which do you want to hear?" Hermione hesitated for a moment, then said, "The good news. Snape took those students to the headmaster's office," Ralph said. "They won't be back for a while, so they won't bother us searching for the Chamber of Secrets." Hermione waited for him to continue. Ralph gloated. "The bad news is that Harry and Ron were among the students caught. Night out and fighting. Your Gryffindor will lose at least 100 points. Hearing Ralph's words, Hermione's blood pressure spiked instantly. She worked so hard answering questions in every class, only to gain 2 points each time. These two could lose 100 points in one night. Ralph completely understood Hermione's feelings. He was so upset he could practically grin from ear to ear. Hermione was very upset, but the thought of entering the Chamber of Secrets left by Ravenclaw was some consolation, and she felt a little better. "So, what about Ms. Grey? The map shows she went to the Hufflepuff Lounge," Shirley said softly. "But Ralph just summoned his patroness to go find her, so she should be here soon." The three stood still for a moment, then a figure passed through the wall and appeared in the library. It was a woman with an ethereal figure and extremely cold and beautiful appearance. She wore a white dress. Her skin was as white as snow, but her body was semi-transparent, giving her an ethereal air. Helena was pleasantly surprised to see Ralph. She thought he wouldn't be coming tonight. But seeing the two girls standing beside him, she frowned slightly. Helena's gaze swept over Hermione, naturally ignoring the girl with the fluffy hair and ordinary appearance, and focused on Sherry. Helena was usually a recluse and rarely interacted with students, but because of Ralph, she had also observed Ralph's assistant from afar in the Ravenclaw common room. At that time, Sherry was extremely thin and young, so Helena only glanced at her a few times and didn't pay much attention. Now, looking at her up close, Helena realized that Sherry was slender, her face and features had matured, and she had grown into a graceful young woman. Her appearance was in no way inferior to her own. Sherry's aura reminded Helena of the water in her mother's well of death, clean, clear, and elegant, its depths unfathomable, yet somehow impossible to dislike. Even Helena herself felt this way looking at the girl. How much more so would Ralph? Helena frowned. Inheriting her mother's beauty, she was always confident in her looks, believing herself to be unmatched. Therefore, she was confident that marrying Ralph would make him willing to resurrect her. But now, looking at Sherry, Helena felt a strange, instinctive sense of crisis. Helena's brow furrowed even more as she stared at Sherry, for she suddenly realized the girl's features resembled someone from the past. Sherry was also scrutinizing this Ravenclaw daughter who wanted to marry Ralph. Hermione, ignored by Helena, was clearly annoyed. For a moment, the atmosphere in the forbidden section was very tense. Ralph realized that the situation would become unmanageable if things continued like this, and he quickly said, "Helena, no one will be coming here for now." "Where is the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets?" Helena glanced at the boy with eyes filled with a melancholy, timid, and plaintive look, and said softly, "Rolf, come with me." With that, Helena floated deeper into the forbidden section. Once she was far away, Hermione lowered her voice and imitated Helena's tone, saying in an affected manner, "Rolf, come with me." Ugh! Hermione made a sound of disgust, then quickly buried her face in Sherry's arm and rubbed it against her, saying she wanted to rub off the goosebumps. Sherry was amused by Hermione. And while she found it funny, she also gave Rolf a light, reproachful look, so this was how Helena usually spoke to him. Rolf sighed, and with nowhere to vent his anger, he couldn't help but tap Hermione on the head. "Ouch! Why did you hit me?" Chapter 554 The Pulsating Secret Box. The forbidden section was located in a spacious, square room, with dark wood floors and ceilings, and 12 bookshelves filled with magical books lining the walls. The three men and the female ghost moved among the bookshelves, heading deeper into the room. They soon reached the end, where a huge, transparent magic cabinet appeared before them, containing a very old leather box. 3 years ago, on that night, Ralph caught a bookworm here, and in that instant, he heard a woman's voice. Sherry and Hermione, who were nearby at the time, didn't hear anything, but Ralph was certain it wasn't a hallucination, even though the voice was faint, disappearing as quickly as the wind. Since then, the boy had visited the library many times, each time with a bookworm, but he had never heard the voice again. "The entrance is here," Helena said softly, pointing to the transparent magic cabinet. "Open it, touch the leather box, and you'll appear at the door to the Chamber of Secrets." Ralph raised an eyebrow. He had asked about this magic cabinet. Dumbledore had said it had been there since the library was built, but no one knew its purpose. "It's the entrance to the Chamber of Secrets in Ravenclaw," Ralph asked. "How do we open it?" "Do we have a key?" "No key," Helena said softly, gazing at the cabinet. "Just one password, and it will open automatically." Ralph, Sherry, and Hermione exchanged glances and exclaimed in unison, "Is extraordinary intelligence humanity's greatest asset?" "That's right," Helena nodded. "But we need to speak runes." The request was simple. The boy quickly recited the well-known Ravenclaw quote in runes. Suddenly, the smooth surface of the cabinet began to glow faintly, starting weakly but gradually growing brighter until it illuminated the entire library. Then, with a loud click, the cabinet door opened. Ralph reached for the thick leather box, its rough texture and unknown material. As soon as he opened it and touched the books inside, the pages suddenly began to turn automatically, faster and faster, until the book burst open, its pages scattering into the air like colorful butterflies. The resulting tornado of pages swept down, engulfing everyone, including Helena. Whoosh, they vanished, sucked into the book. Ralph experienced only a moment of dizziness before landing on solid ground. He looked up, his expression freezing. Something was very wrong. There was no long, dark passage as he remembered, no wooden door with its eagle-shaped bronze knocker. Ralph hadn't appeared at the entrance to Ravenclaw's Chamber of Secrets as Helena had said. Instead, he was standing in an unfamiliar place. The boy looked around and found that Sherry, Hermione, and Helena had also disappeared. He stood alone in a dimly lit, dusty room. In the center of the room stood a large tree, its roots anchored in a sealed box. Ralph was suddenly astonished to find that this place resembled the third painting in Nicholas C. Nicholas's Book of Abraham. Only, there was no wizard wielding a sword, and no green dragon. And this wasn't a painting, but a real scene. The box seemed alive, pulsating, each pulsation producing a deep, resonant sound. Ralph looked around and found that besides the slowly pulsating box and the large tree, there was nothing else in the room. A blood-red face suddenly appeared on the tree trunk, staring intently at Ralph. Ravenclaw, a voice rang out, half whisper, half groan. Ravenclaw. Ravenclaw. The leaves suddenly rustled, and on each leaf opened a blood-red eye, coldly and silently watching Ralph. Those blood-red eyes rolled and flickered, layer upon layer extending upwards, giving the feeling that countless eyes were staring straight at Ralph, sending chills down his spine. Ralph searched for an exit, but the walls of the room seemed to be slowly shifting and rolling, trying to trap him. The boy cried out, and the dizziness returned. When he opened his eyes, he found himself out of that terrifying room, standing before a wooden door. The door had no handle, no keyhole, only an eagle-shaped bronze knocker. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets in Ravenclaw. Sherry and Hermione seemed to have just landed, looking around. Hermione pointed to the other side of the passage and asked, "What's that over there?" Ralph didn't speak, he was still breathing heavily, shaken. Helena, floating in midair, explained, "The passages lead to the Chambers of Secrets in Hufflepuff and Gryffindor. The four masters used to meet often to exchange magical insights." Sherry keenly noticed that something was wrong with the boy, and she asked softly, "Ralph, what's wrong?" Ralph didn't answer, but asked, "Shirley, did you encounter any problems when you came over through this book?" "No." The girl with the ponytail looked at Ralph and shook her head. "It was like using a key, it floated in midair for a while and then landed." "Is that so?" Ralph pondered without speaking. So, he was the only one who saw what happened just now? Shirley didn't ask any more questions. Instead, she took out a handkerchief from her pocket and gently wiped the sweat from his forehead. "I'm fine." Ralph smiled reassuringly at her. Helena pointed to the wooden door and said softly, "Ever since my mother died, the bronze door knocker has been locked by magic. Hufflepuff told me that a key is needed to open it again. Professor Ravenclaw has already given me the key," Ralph said, opening the box and taking out a magic book. He shook it gently, and a magical creature with silver-gray scales and 9 whiskers at the end of its abdomen quickly emerged. 1,000 years ago, Ralph had Cassandra help him divine the location of the key. She said it was in the library, but for some reason, it was always moving. Ralph guessed that the key left by Ravenclaw was this 900-year-old bookworm. The bookworm sniffed hard, flew out of the book, and entered the bronze door knocker. A moment later, the bronze door knocker seemed to come alive, its beak immediately opening, and asked in a gentle, musical voice, "If yesterday is placed in tomorrow, it will become 2 days ago." So, should the day after tomorrow be today or yesterday? Ralph thought for a moment and said, "The day after tomorrow should be today." Correct answer. After the voice finished speaking, the door creaked open. Ralph took a deep breath and stepped into Ravenclaw's Chamber of Secrets. After 1,000 years, thanks to the generous donation from Just Love to Wonder the Water. Chapter 555 Ravenclaw's Letter. 1,000 years later, Helena stepped into Ravenclaw's Chambers of Secrets once more. She stared blankly at the room, utterly lost in thought. A towering, round bookshelf came into view, pressed against the walls, filled with thousands of leather-bound spellbooks and chests upon chests of ancient scrolls, piled high, reaching to the ceiling. 1,000 years had passed, yet the furnishings remained unchanged, exactly as they had been. This feeling left Helena somewhat dazed. For a fleeting moment, she felt as if she had returned to her carefree girlhood, and distant yet familiar scenes flashed before her eyes, her mother, through the crystal ball, watching the young wizard struggling to catch her lateness, tormented by the stares, with a mischievous smile, Hufflepuff, biting her quill, racking her brains to write a recipe, having just discovered a crop called carrots in Persia, which she planned to use as a side dish, Slytherin, Communicating with a basilisk as thick as a bowl, hissing and babooning incomprehensible language, young Helena, copying others' homework, even including their names, and thus standing in the corner with a crystal ball on her head as punishment. Gryffindor listened patiently to Helena's lamentations, sympathizing with the trouble she had caused because of her foolishness. Thinking of this, a sudden sadness filled Helena's beautiful face, because it had been 1,000 years. The past was like smoke, all vanished. Ralph, too, had returned to this place after 1,000 years, but unlike Helena, he wasn't overwhelmed with emotion or sentimentality. He had used the Ravenclaw time machine to traverse vast stretches of time. In reality, it felt like only a few months had passed. Ralph was more focused on the fact that he would now be the master of this secret chamber. Hermione, a true bookworm, was completely mesmerized by the shelves overflowing with spellbooks. She exclaimed in admiration, craning her neck to read the titles. "This place is absolutely amazing," she exclaimed repeatedly. These were all Ravenclaw spellbooks, even those from her time were over 1,000 years old. The thought filled Hermione with overwhelming excitement. The girl planned to stay here permanently, devouring all these books, even if Ralph, that scoundrel, used the opportunity to make unreasonable demands. She would agree without hesitation, without even flinching. The observant Shirley noticed something on the table in the center of the room. Approaching, she glanced down and whispered, "Ralph, there's a letter here. It looks like it was left by Ravenclaw." Before Ralph could speak, Helena cried out, her voice filled with heart-wrenching excitement. "A letter from my mother? It must be for me." Helena eagerly floated to the table, but when she landed and saw the words on the envelope, she froze. The envelope was indeed signed Rowena Ravenclaw, and Helena recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. But the letter wasn't for her, it was addressed to Ralph. Helena was speechless, unable to believe her eyes. She examined the letter again closely. The envelope clearly stated, "To Ralph Scamander." But how could this be? Her mother and Ralph were separated by 1,000 years, they couldn't possibly have known each other. How could she have left him a letter? Helena was utterly baffled, but then it dawned on her. Her mother was the infamous Ravenclaw, the wisest witch in the world. She must have a way to travel 1,000 years to see Ralph. Therefore, they must have known each other for a long time. That's why Ralph knew her nickname was Dumb Beauty, and why he possessed the key to the Chamber of Secrets. No wonder Ralph carried such a strong maternal aura. Helena's mind raced, and suddenly a ridiculous and audacious thought popped into her head. Could the man I'm going to marry be my father, whom I've never seen in 1,000 years? No. Helena immediately banished this absurd idea. She couldn't accept such a thing. Helena preferred to believe what her Gryffindor uncle said, that she was picked up from a garbage dump by her mother. Ralph was unaware that Helena was already mentally conjuring up a morally reprehensible essay. If he knew, he probably couldn't help but exclaim, "Helena, with such an imagination, why don't you write novels?" The boy picked up the letter, pried open the blue wax seal shaped like an eagle with his thumb, and pulled out a letter. Sherry, Hermione, and Helena gathered around Ralph, reading the letter that spanned 1,000 years. "Ralph, when I write this letter to you, you and Cassandra Trelawney should have already arrived in the kingdom of Nadia and met the goblin Legnark and the sword he reforged. I told you that the magical material for that sword came from a broken sword, a weapon forged by an ancient wizard before the apocalypse, found by Gryffindor in the ruins. That sword is very important. You must find it 1,000 years from now and keep it safe. Remember this. I am about to travel to the forests of Albania to find Helena. So, by the time you read this letter, I will surely be dead. But do not grieve for me, for as I said by the well of death, I already knew my destiny. Enclosed with this letter is a map I drew myself 17 years ago after I strayed into Avalon. It will be useful to you. Of course, 1,000 years have passed for you, and much of the landscape may have changed, so please be careful. This secret chamber contains ancient wizarding materials I have collected over the years, my notes, and the well of the dead, all left to you. I will seal the room. In your future self, having obtained my silverfish, it will become my key. But remember, nothing from this chamber is to be taken out. Helga intends to leave the time turner you used. You can only return using the time sphere I invented, though it has some errors, it's still good. I remember you said the time turner belonged to your classmate Hermione Granger. As compensation, the time sphere's creation process will remain in the secret chamber. You can pass it on. Helga is calling me for dinner. She wants me to add, don't forget you still owe her a lot of money. Finally, take good care of Helena and the girl who can enter my grave. Rowena Ravenclaw. Ralph placed the letter back in the envelope and sat down in the quiet, deserted room. He reached out and gently smoothed the envelope on the table. Sherry, Hermione, and Helena were also speechless for a moment. Chapter 556 Ravenclaw's Face. After reading Ravenclaw's letter to Ralph, the group fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Ralph pondered the Gryffindor sword, the fact that Ravenclaw mentioned it so often even on his deathbed. It must have been incredibly important. Sherry, meanwhile, thought about the last line of the letter, the girl who can enter my grave, repeating it to herself several times, her mind filled with questions. This line clearly referred to her. Her being able to enter Ravenclaw's grave was no coincidence, but why? Sherry was momentarily bewildered. Helena, meanwhile, was thinking about the time turner, so that's how Ralph traveled back in time. As for Hermione, she was the most excited. Ravenclaw had actually mentioned her in the letter and even left her compensation. Hermione now deeply regretted not agreeing to the Sorting Hat and going to Ravenclaw. Alice, what a regret. After a long silence, Ralph broke it, suggesting they go explore the cave. Sherry, Hermione, and Helena didn't object. They followed the boy deeper into the library. The group passed the Sphinx statue and entered a vast, deep cave. In the distance lay a clear, azure lake, as blue as the sky, and in the center of the lake sat an island. Ralph frowned as he gazed at the island. He saw a towering, leafy tree growing there. Its trunk was a full 4 meters in diameter, its dark bark almost black, and its leaves glowed a rich green, illuminating the entire cave. The scene resembled summer sunlight streaming through a roof of tender leaves. Hermione craned her neck, looked up, and exclaimed in astonishment, "What a huge olive tree! But why are the leaves glowing?" Sherry, looking at the glowing olive tree, suddenly remembered the enormous golden apple tree she had seen in Ravenclaw's tomb. This strange olive tree was clearly also from Avalon. Just as Shirley was about to discuss the olive tree's effects with Ralph, she noticed his expression was off and asked, "What's wrong, Ralph?" Ralph snapped out of his reverie and asked, puzzled, "When I came here years ago, I didn't see this olive tree. In fact, there weren't any trees on the island back then. I've been here before, and there weren't any trees either," Helena said. "So it was planted by Ravenclaw before they left," Hermione guessed. "Probably," Ralph said. "Let's go to the island and take a look." Shirley took 2 flying broomsticks from her trunk, gave one to Hermione, and the group flew across the lake to the small island in the middle of it. Ralph had been here a few months before, so he knew the way and walked confidently in the lead, passing through a tall green hedge and entering an enclosed garden. They climbed a long flight of stairs to a high platform where they saw a well. Ralph stepped forward, gently striding onto the edge of the well. Leaning slightly forward, he peered down into the well. In that moment, he finally felt the weight of time. 1,000 years ago, the well was overflowing, but now the water level had dropped drastically, almost to the bottom. "Is this the death well you mentioned?" Shirley asked. "That's right, this is the death well created by the ancient wizard," Ralph nodded, looking at Shirley and Hermione, and smiled. "Through this death well, you can see the scene of your own death. Would you like to take a look?" Shirley didn't hesitate much, walking to the well's edge and looking down. Although the water level had dropped considerably, she could still feel it chilling or washing over her. But strangely, no matter how long the girl with the ponytail looked, the well remained unchanged. Hermione also came closer, but there was no change either. "Could this well have broken down because it's been neglected for so long?" Ralph asked doubtfully. "Maybe," Hermione said. "Look at the water level, it's dropped so much," Ralph sighed. What was Ravenclaw doing, leaving themselves a well that was broken? Hermione wanted to get closer to the water's surface to see if there was any change, so she put half her body into the well. However, her hands slipped, and she fell into the well. Help!" Ralph reacted quickly, grabbing her ankle tightly and pulling her up with all his might. Sherry also quickly grabbed her other foot, pulling her back. Hermione sat on the edge of the well, panting heavily, still shaken. The death well didn't show any signs of death, so Sherry and Hermione quickly left to look for the olive tree on the island. Of course, mainly because Hermione was afraid of falling into the well again, she grabbed the girl with the ponytail and ran away. For a moment, only Ralph and Helena remained by the death well. Helena was in turmoil, wanting to ask so many questions but unsure where to begin. Ralph spoke first. "Helena, Did you see this well of death back then? Helena nodded and then shook her head. What do you mean? Ralph raised an eyebrow. My mother wouldn't let me see the well, Helena said slowly. So I sneaked over, but like that girl named Granger, I fell into the well, so I didn't see the specific images. You know, the well of death can only be seen once, and then the images won't appear again. Ralph chuckled. Truly, a beautiful but foolish girl. Seeing Helena hesitate, the boy said softly, ask whatever you want, I just saw in the letter that you. Helena stared at Ralph and whispered, you used the time turner and met my mother. Yes, didn't I disappear for a while not long ago? Ralph said frankly, I went back 1,000 years and met Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and Gryffindor, and even stayed at Hogwarts for a while, after you returned to school as a ghost. Didn't anyone mention Slytherin's son? Helena thought for a moment, then belatedly realized, I think so, but he disappeared from the school. That person was me, Ralph said. I speak parsley, so they thought I was Slytherin's son. Helena was somewhat taken aback, her voice trembling. So, when you came, you weren't at Hogwarts, Ralph said. The day I came, you took the tiara and secretly left the school. We missed each other like that. Helena wanted to ask something more, but suddenly Sherry's shout rang out in the distance. Ruff, come look at this. Helena, my story is long, Ruff whispered. There's definitely no time tonight. If you want to know, come back later, and I'll tell you. Anyway, I might really be able to resurrect you. Helena looked at the boy with delight and nodded vigorously. Ruff left Helena and ran towards Sherry, following the sound. The girl with the ponytail was standing under the olive tree, pointing to the trunk. Look at this. Ruff looked up at the trunk and froze. On the trunk of the olive tree was a face, but it wasn't the blood-red face Ruff had seen many times before. It was Ravenclaw's face. Chapter 557. A Useless Crown. Grindelwald had traveled to Avalon, where, according to him, every tree bore a blood-red human face. Rove had seen Grindelwald's elderberry and Ravenclaw's golden apple tree, and they were indeed like that. But this olive tree was entirely different. It bore Ravenclaw's face. Rove reached out and gently stroked it. Surprisingly, the face lacked the roughness of bark. Instead, it felt as smooth and delicate as a woman's skin. The boy gently caressed it with his fingers for a while, then pressed his ear close, holding his breath and listening intently. Sherry asked softly, can you see it? Rove shook his head. I can't hear it. When near the blood-red faces of the elderberry and golden apple trees, one could hear a sound like a heartbeat, but Ravenclaw's face didn't have that pulsation. Of course, those faces weren't as smooth and comfortable to touch as this one. The boy wanted to cut a branch to see if it would bleed, but after much deliberation, he gave up. This olive tree is unusual, and clearly related to Ravenclaw, so let's not harm it. Having found nothing from his research, Ralph simply stopped bothering with it and sat side by side with Shirley under the tree, gazing at the calm lake surface shimmering with light. The boy suddenly realized someone was missing. He looked around, puzzled, and asked, where did Hermione go? Hermione. I told you about this tree from Avalon. Its fruit and leaves have amazing effects when consumed. Shirley brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and said softly, she went to her room to find books, hoping to see if Ravenclaw had left any records about olive trees. So many books. How long will it take to find them all? Hermione's got a lot of motivation. Shirley laughed. She just said she's going to read all the books Ravenclaw left behind. Ralph smiled knowingly. That was indeed something Hermione would do, but after thinking for a moment, he sighed. A good idea, but probably hard to achieve. According to the letter, those books contained ancient wizarding magic and Ravenclaw's own notes. The content must be extremely obscure and difficult, not something an ordinary person could learn. Hermione was indeed very hardworking, arguably the most hardworking student Ralph had ever seen, without a doubt. But some knowledge simply cannot be mastered through hard work alone. This reminded him of a classic question he'd encountered in his past life. Why didn't Guo Jing print out a large number of copies of the 9-yin manual so everyone could learn it and fight against the Yuan army? The reason was simple, they couldn't learn it. Newton and Einstein's books were readily available to everyone, practically one for each person, and cutting-edge research papers could be downloaded online. These were the equivalent of the 9-yin manual, yet, they didn't produce a large number of physicists, though they did create quite a few amateur scientists. This kind of advanced knowledge required talent, it wasn't something just anyone could learn. Ralph didn't deny Hermione's intelligence, she was first in her class. If she wasn't intelligent, then Hogwarts would have no smart people. But Hermione wasn't a true genius. True geniuses were like Dumbledore, Grindelwald, and Voldemort. Sherry was also a genius, but only in the field of transfiguration. Similarly, Ralph, who inherited Ravenclaw's Chamber of Secrets, like Hermione, truly lacked the ability to learn that kind of knowledge. What if you used Ravenclaw's crown? Sherry asked curiously. Isn't it rumored to have magical properties that increase the wearer's intelligence? Ralph smiled wryly. He bent down, plucked a blade of grass, brushed off the dirt, chewed it, and whispered, "The first thing I did after getting the crown was put it on, and then I tried to solve the Muggle-Poincaré conjecture and the Riemann hypothesis." Sherry didn't know what those were, but seeing Ralph's expression, she knew it must be difficult. She asked, "And then, my mind went blank. I couldn't solve them at all." Ralph shook his head. "I lowered the difficulty and tried a few spells that I wasn't very familiar with, but I still wasn't very good at casting them." "So, the crown doesn't increase intelligence?" Sherry asked doubtfully. "It's just because Ravenclaw is so smart that others think it's because of the crown?" I asked Hufflepuff the same question. Ralph spat out the grass and whispered, "But she told me that the crown really can greatly increase a person's IQ, but only Ravenclaw knows how to use it." Shirley remained silent for a moment, then comforted him. "Perhaps the books in the secret room contain the method." "I hope so," Rove said, closing his eyes, tilting his head back, and leaning lazily against the tree trunk. "By the way, Rove, just now at the door, you looked terrible. Your forehead was covered in sweat. Did something happen?" Shirley asked with concern. "When I opened that book, I found myself in a strange room." Ralph opened his eyes, rubbed his cheeks, and slowly said, "In that room, there was a sealed box that seemed alive, constantly pulsating, and a large tree grew on top of it. On that tree, there was also a blood-red face that kept calling out to Ravenclaw, and then I woke up." The girl with the ponytail pondered for a moment, then asked doubtfully, "A treasure chest in a tree. Isn't that the scene from the third painting in Nicholas's Book of Abraham?" "Yes," Ralph nodded solemnly. "I saw a sword and a hat at the time, and I thought the scene depicted in that painting was related to Gryffindor. But I never expected to see it in a book left by Ravenclaw. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets was set up by Ravenclaw, which means that the scene in that room was also left by her, which she wanted you to see," Shirley said. "That's right." Ralph turned around, looked up, and stared at the Ravenclaw face on the olive tree. Though her eyes were tightly closed, she seemed to be gazing, listening, and contemplating profound and distant thoughts. The boy murmured, "Royna Ravenclaw, what are you trying to tell me?" Ralph recalled the countless eyes in the tree, and a sudden, inexplicable, goosebump-like dread washed over him. The girl with the ponytail watched Ralph's tightly pursed lips and furrowed brow, vaguely sensing a hidden unease in him, a tension bordering on confusion. Sherry knelt on the ground, her legs bent and crossed, and reached out to touch the boy's head. Ralph slowly leaned back, resting his head on the girl's supple legs, then wearily closed his eyes. Sherry untied the amulet from her neck and hung it around Ralph's neck. She extended a finger and gently smoothed the boy's furrowed brow. In the distance, Helena's singing suddenly rang out, her voice, ethereal and melodious, with a unique charm, echoed across the Twilight Island. Shirley listened quietly for a while, and when she looked down again, she found that Ralph in her arms had fallen into deep sleep. Chapter 558 Snape's Antidote. Ron, Sherry, and Hermione spent the night in the Chamber of Secrets in Ravenclaw, not returning to school until noon the next day. Since it was Saturday and there were no classes, no one noticed the three who had been missing all night and morning. Even if someone did notice, their attention would quickly be drawn to Harry, Ron, and Malfoy. After all, they had done something really serious last night. It was the Gryffindor students who first discovered this. The Gryffindor students went to the Great Hall early in the morning, only to find to their horror that the hourglass was empty. They initially thought there was something wrong with the hourglass, but after inquiring, they learned that last night, Harry and Ron had been caught fighting Malfoy in the Forbidden Library, by Snape. Nighttime wandering, sneaking into the Forbidden Library, and fighting, each of these was a serious offense, and Harry and Ron had committed them all at once. With multiple offenses combined, the two were immediately penalized with a 200-point deduction and placed in detention. The Gryffindor students were undoubtedly in an uproar. On the first day of school, Harry and Ron had already lost 100 points. That evening, Professor McGonagall even went to the common room to hold a house meeting, urging the students to work hard on answering questions in the new semester. Even if each question only added 1 point, with the combined efforts of students from all 7 years, they could quickly make up for the 100-point gap. It was common knowledge that Professor McGonagall was obsessed with a house cup, so the young lions all agreed. Even the twins were prepared to reduce their pranks to help Professor McGonagall fulfill her old age dream. They were already in 6th year, with only 2 years left until graduation, and Gryffindor would never have students as outstanding as them again. When would Professor McGonagall have another chance to lift the house cup? With such a united effort, Gryffindor not only made up for the 100 points in just 1 week, but also accumulated 58 house points. They had never fought such a rich battle in their lives. The young lions were very involved and decided to keep going, determined to win the house cup as a birthday gift for Professor McGonagall. But Harry and Ron undoubtedly dealt them a heavy blow, leaving everyone dejected. Are you two undercover agents? Every time Gryffindor tries to gain momentum, they deliberately deduct large points to curb the school's momentum. The most outrageous thing is, this isn't a one-off event, but an annual tradition, all about self-discipline, right? Harry and Ron faced resistance from their own house, and were almost beaten up at lunch in the Great Hall. If Professor McGonagall hadn't arrived in time, it might have escalated into a mass school violence incident. Although Professor McGonagall intervened, she was furious inside. She wanted to punch them too. Professor McGonagall couldn't help but wonder what she had done in her past life to deserve being punished by being in the same house as Potter and Weasley. She had originally thought that by using the enduring the old man tactic, she could easily become headmistress after Dumbledore retired. But judging from the current trend, she might not even last until Harry and Ron, these two troublemakers, graduate before she's driven to her death by anger. Many Gryffindor students began discussing how to get these two good-for-nothings. Number 1 in point deductions to transfer to another house. For example, he could go to the neighboring Hufflepuff house for technical assistance, giving them a small, shocking deduction. As for Slytherin, there was no need to go. After all, they also had 3 infamous insects there. Snape was both happy and frustrated. Happy because he had caught Potter twice in 1 week, frustrated because Malfoy, Goyle, and Crabbe were always nearby each time he caught him. This meant that for every point deducted from Gryffindor, Slytherin would also lose points. Snape could only suffer a bittersweet feeling. After much thought, he decided that instead of improving himself, he should belittle others. So, in the second week's potions class, Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw were the unlucky ones. The students arrived at the potions classroom early in the morning. Just as they were about to enter, Snape stood on the platform and said coldly, "Hannah Abbott, why didn't you greet me?" "Hufflepuff will lose 2 points for disrespecting your teacher." Hannah was completely bewildered. Everyone hurriedly and respectfully greeted Professor Snape, and Susan even repeated herself several times, afraid he wouldn't hear her. "Mandy Brohill, why are you yelling so loudly? Are you threatening me?" Ravenclaw, 2 points deducted. In the next few minutes, Snape randomly selected a few more lucky students to deduct points from. When everyone entered the classroom and sat down, they all understood one thing: this was no friendly visit. Snape, dragging his long robes, paced around a large barrel of dead longhorn toads, his black eyes fixed on the trembling students. "Justin Finley, if you and Migmel were walking in the wild and he got bitten on the butt by a viper, what would you do?" Justin held his breath and thought for a long time before saying with a look of disgust, "I'd take off his pants and suck the venom out with my mouth." Although the atmosphere was tense, everyone tried their best to hold back their laughter. "Then you can just wait to be poisoned to death," Snape said coldly, his face grim. Remember, snake venom can easily enter the body through bleeding gums, cracks in the tongue, or ulcers in the mouth. If you encounter a poison wizard, don't suck it out with your mouth. Hufflepuff deduct 2 points. Justin pursed his lips and sat down. Snape then turned his gaze, pursing his lips as he stared at Ralph, and asked, "Scamander, if you and Swinton were walking in the wild, and she accidentally used a poisonous mushroom, and you didn't have any antidote on you, what would you do?" Everyone looked at Ralph. He stood up, thought for a moment, and said, "I would immediately start a fire to make charcoal. After ingestion, it can cause excessive bile excretion and has absorbent properties, making it a gastrointestinal antidote." "Just reading from the book," Snape snorted coldly, then looked up at the whole class and roared, "Why haven't you all memorized this? You're the worst class I've ever taught." A rustling sound of quills and parchment filled the classroom. Amidst the noise, Snape said, "When poisoned, if there's no antidote available, Or if you can't identify the poison, bezoar and charcoal can often serve as antidotes. They have universal detoxifying properties, but their applications are always limited. Today, I'll teach you how to make another universal antidote. Snape looked at the crowd, his thin lips twisting into a malicious smile. Before Halloween, I'll poison one of you and see if his antidote works. Chapter 559. Who is still brewing traditional magic potions? The great potions master and dog lover, Pavlov, once said, "Where there are humans, there is medicine." This is absolutely true. Since the dawn of humanity, humans have engaged in various medical activities, with the search for a universal antidote against all poisons being a constant throughout human history. Wizards, after extensive research, discovered that bezoar, activated charcoal, and serpentstone, fossilized shark teeth, possess broad detoxifying abilities. Of course, this broadness is relative and cannot truly neutralize all toxins. The potions taught by Professor Snape are also a kind of universal antidote with certain limitations. However, after seeing the ingredients on the blackboard, the young wizards were inexplicably frightened. Blister beetle, aconite, bitter almond, viper venom, pufferfish liver, longhorn toad skin, all poisonous substances, each capable of killing on its own. Looking at the recipe alone, it's hard not to suspect that this isn't brewing a universal antidote, but rather concocting the ultimate mixed poison. While Snape turned his back, Macmillan barely moved his lips and whispered, "Is he sure he didn't mix up the recipe? If Snape had mixed up the poison and antidote, wouldn't everyone be doomed after taking it?" Justin hesitated for a moment, then whispered, "Could this be the legendary, fighting poison with poison?" Snape, without turning around, seemed to have eyes in the back of his head, and said softly, "Do either of you not know any words?" Macmillan, Finlay, the two were startled and stood up tremblingly. Justin stammered, "Professor, we can read." "Then what are you whispering about?" Snape turned around, his cold, dark eyes flashing with a terrifying light. Justin was too frightened to speak, as was Macmillan. But then he suddenly remembered a Muggle story he'd heard from Ralph. An old professor changed an exam time at the last minute, and only one student questioned it in class, saying it would interfere with his studies. The professor admired the student's courage, didn't make him take the exam, and gave him full marks. Maybe Snape was like that too, disliking timid little wizards and preferring rebellious students? Didn't Ralph, in his second year, also change Snape's potion ingredients and end up getting extra marks for it? Thinking of this, Macmillan's wickedness surged, and in a moment of impulsiveness, he shouted, "Professor Snape, I think you're wrong. What you gave me wasn't an antidote, but a poison formula." These words were like a thunderbolt. The students gasped. How dare Macmillan say such a thing? Did he have a death wish? Ralph couldn't help but fathom him. Had this silly kid drunk fake alcohol, or had he consumed too much toxic positivity? Snape slowly walked towards Macmillan, staring at him coldly. "So, you're questioning the potions I invented?" "No. I just think," Macmillan shrank back, saying, "these magical ingredients are all highly poisonous. Can the potions we make really serve as antidotes?" "Good, good, good," Snape said 3 times, sneering. "I never imagined I'd encounter a fourth-year student who doesn't understand such simple pharmacology." "Scamander, you answer the stupid question for me." Ralph stood up helplessly, saying softly, "Before brewing potions, we treat the poisonous magical ingredients to reduce or remove toxicity." "What are the methods for reducing or removing toxicity?" "Heating to remove toxicity, adding excipients to remove toxicity, pressing to remove toxicity, soaking to remove toxicity, and removing the poisonous parts. These methods reduce toxicity," Ralph quickly replied. Without Snape's prompting, the young wizards hurriedly took notes. 20 points deducted for talking back to Hufflepuff. "After school, you'll be cleaning toad entrails, Macmillan." Snape's face drew close to the tearful Macmillan, his signature sarcastic smile playing on his lips. "If I ever hear you question my potions again, I'll make you regret it." From then on, no students dared question Snape. After receiving their magical materials, everyone obediently followed the steps on the blackboard, carefully brewing the antidote. Just as Ralph had said, the magical materials needed to be detoxified before brewing the antidote. If this step wasn't handled properly, the potion would become poison. Snape had explained how to detoxify each material, but he had never done so systematically, only mentioning it incidentally when encountering a particular material. The method for processing pufferfish liver even dates back to first grade. Who the hell remembers that? The young wizards had no choice but to painstakingly flip through their old notebooks, checking each one individually. Ralph and Sherry were also processing magical materials, but they weren't following Snape's instructions to detoxify them. Snape, of course, noticed this. He immediately stood by the cauldron, staring at the two with deadpan eyes. The other students, witnessing this, were filled with boundless admiration for Ralph and Sherry. Macmillan had just tested the waters, and these two dared to defy the odds, truly courageous. Macmillan was also pleased, now he had someone to share his solitary confinement. Sherry, who was dealing with a longhorn toad, was instinctively a little nervous. Ralph sat beside the girl and gently held her slightly cool hand. Although she quickly let go, Snape still noticed. He expressionlessly twitched the corners of his mouth, revealing a mocking smile. Holding hands like that in front of me, Scamander and Swinton are asking for death? But Snape quickly froze. When he detoxified the aconite, he would add licorice and honey, then boil it over high heat for a long time. The process was extremely tedious. Scamander, on the other hand, simply added a potion, rinsed it for a while, and then threw the aconite into the cauldron. A wisp of shimmering silvery white steam rose from the crucible, indicating that the detoxification was successful. How could Scamander be so fast? Snape couldn't help but pick up the vial, sniff it against his hooked nose, and frowned. Alum, yes, Professor, I added alum. Ralph nodded. Alum is a double salt that dissociates into aluminum ions in water, absorbing toxic alkaloids and glycosides. Using alum to process aconite causes aconitine to precipitate in the aqueous solution, thus accelerating the elimination of the toxic substances. Snape was completely bewildered. Aluminum ions, aconitine, alkaloids, what were all these things? He was silent for a moment, then his eyes flickered. Who taught you to process aconite this way? Ralph couldn't very well say it was his chemistry teacher from his previous life. He thought for a moment and said, Muggles all process it this way. They've also invented many other chemicals to process various magical materials, all of which are much more convenient than traditional methods. Snape narrowed his eyes. It seemed that Muggles did have some expertise. Professor, I've written it all down here. Ralph pulled out a notebook and handed it to Snape. You can ask me anything you don't understand. I know a little bit about chemistry. Snape hesitated for a moment, then took the notebook. The whole class erupted in an uproar. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 560 Malfoy's Forced Twin Beauties. After potions class, the students left the underground classroom in shock. They had seen students praised by their teachers, students who talked back, and students who chatted and laughed with their teachers, but this was the first time in their lives they had ever seen a student who had to teach their teacher a lesson. It was truly an eye-opener. News of what had happened in class quickly spread throughout the school, and many people were horrified and incredulous upon hearing it. Ralph's previous unauthorized alteration of Snape's potions preparations, which resulted in extra house points, was already astonishing, but this was even more outrageous. The most outrageous thing was that after saying those things to Snape, he actually walked out of the potions classroom alive, and Hufflepuff didn't lose any points. In many people's eyes, this was like something out of a science fiction movie. Everyone was bewildered. Was this still the same irritable, ill-tempered, extremely hypocritical, and sarcastic Professor Snape? Could Ralph have something on him? Or was he under the Imperius curse? Or perhaps someone was impersonating him using Polyjuice potion? Only these three possibilities seemed more plausible. The chemistry that Ralph mentioned became a hot topic among the students, with the young wizards believing it was a subject that could simplify potions. But where could they learn it? In Muggle Studies class, Professor Bubbage accidentally revealed that she held a PhD in chemistry from Clayton University. As a result, students flocked to audit her classes every day. Professor Bubbage immediately announced that she would lead everyone in developing a chemical, mustard gas. When a student asked what mustard gas was, she explained that it was a Muggle perfume. Professor Bubbage also instructed the young wizards to quickly produce mustard gas as a surprise gift for the students from Boxburtons and Durmstrang when they arrived. Knowing that this was for the sake of the great friendship between the three schools, the students were even more motivated and eagerly awaited the arrival of the two schools at Hogwarts. In mid-October, The school bulletin board finally posted a notice. Representatives from Boxburtons and Durmstrang would arrive at 6 p.m. on Friday, October 30th. Afternoon classes will end half an hour early. Students are requested to assemble in front of the castle to greet our guests and then attend the welcome banquet. This announcement further excited the students. For the next week, wherever they went, everyone was talking about the same topic, the Triwizard Tournament. Who would become the champion of Hogwarts, what the tournament would consist of, and how the students of Boxburtons and Durmstrang differed from their own were all hot topics of discussion. Malfoy talked incessantly about Durmstrang, praising its teaching as far superior to Hogwarts. He also mentioned that his father and Headmaster Karkaroff were close friends, and that he was considering transferring to Durmstrang to bring his magical talents to Northern Europe. When everyone countered that Hogwarts ranked 6th in the magic school assessment, while Durmstrang only ranked 10th, Malfoy retorted, "That's a shoddy ranking. Who says it's a shoddy ranking? This is clearly a ranking released by the International Wizarding Federation, official statistics." Malfoy's face flushed red, veins bulging on his forehead, as he argued. Durmstrang's raw strength is simply stronger than Hogwarts' raw strength. This was followed by incomprehensible statements, such as suppression by the International Wizarding Federation, and Durmstrang and Alphemone are the two beauties of the magic school, which drew laughter from everyone. Alphemone was ranked first in the magic school. Durmstrang didn't deserve to be called the two beauties. Justin, on the other hand, was a typical Hogwarts fanboy, believing that among the 11 magic schools, Hogwarts, if not the strongest overall, was certainly among the top 3. They shouldn't have associated with those two bad students, Boxburtons and Durmstrang. A bunch of terrible chess players together, wasn't that just polluting their own database? But according to Ralph, Boxburtons, sponsored by Nicholas Flamel, was incredibly luxurious, and the students' treatment was exceptionally good. Single rooms in the dormitories with private bathrooms, tuition waived, textbooks, magical materials, cauldrons, and other teaching equipment all included. The public flying broomsticks were going to be equipped with firebolts, and there were scholarships several times greater than Hogwarts. Justin regretted it so much he slapped himself. He should have gone to Boxburtons. Both were bottom-ranked, trashy schools. Why did he have to stay in this old, run-down Hogwarts? However, everyone suddenly noticed that the workload had increased significantly in the past few weeks. Even Professor Trelawney had assigned the task of predicting one's own fortune 2 years later. When the students couldn't help but complain, Professor Flitwick, the ever-kind-hearted teacher, explained in his charms class, "This is to help you refocus your attention and pull it back from the Triwizard Tournament to your studies." Mentioning the Triwizard Tournament, the students started whispering again, and Hannah couldn't help but raise her hand and ask, "Professor Flitwick, how exactly are the champions chosen?" Everyone looked at Professor Flitwick expectantly. He was known for his kindness and was the only teacher who might reveal any information. Professor Flitwick remained tight-lipped. He shook his head and smiled. "I can't tell you, but the selection will definitely be fair, you can rest assured. The best students will be chosen as champions." "Professor, I have a friend," Ron couldn't help but ask. "His grades might not be great, his Quidditch might not be outstanding, and his fighting skills are so-so, but I know he's excellent. Does a student like that have a chance to become a Hogwarts champion?" "Mr. Weasley," Professor Flitwick asked in a high-pitched voice, "your friend is no good at this or that. Do you think he has a chance to become a champion?" "But in my opinion, he is indeed excellent," Ron muttered. "Then you should at least name a few things he's good at." Ron stammered for a while before finally saying, "He plays wizard chess very well." Professor Flitwick stood on a pile of books and said softly, "Then I suggest your friend participate in the Wizard Chess Youth Tournament. He doesn't necessarily have to become a champion." The students all laughed. Harry laughed. "Ron, your friend is really funny. He's useless at everything, yet he thinks he's so great. Ha ha, how come I didn't know you had a friend like that, Ron?" Professor Flitwick coughed a few times and said loudly, "All right, everyone, pay attention to the blackboard. I'll explain the summoning charm to you one more time, and next class we can start practicing." Ron looked at the blackboard and asked in a low voice, "Hermione, how is the potion you made?" Hermione copied the notes from the blackboard and nodded. "It'll be ready in about a week." "By the way, what's the potion for?" Ron's lips curled up and he smiled. "It's a secret. You'll find out in a while. Thanks to Just Love to Wonder in the Water for the donation." Chapter 561 Boxburtons School of Magic. The arrival of Boxburtons and Durmstrang schools at Hogwarts has had the most obvious impact. The school is suddenly, completely transformed. Yes, not just clean, but completely transformed. The old tiles have been replaced with new ones, the walls have been freshly painted, covering up unsightly graffiti, the classrooms are spotless. The portraits have been thoroughly scrubbed. In one instance, a black wizard's portrait was rubbed so hard it turned his skin white, causing him to wince in pain. The dusty armor has become gleaming, lubricated to prevent creaking during movement. The old Hogwarts, like an old woman in elaborate clothes, focused on a sense of history, has now been powdered, given a facelift, and injected with collagen, instantly transforming into a beautiful young woman. Filch was satisfied. He patrolled the castle daily with Mrs. Loris, and if he saw anyone dirtying the floor, he'd drag them to his office for a good scolding. Besides suggesting no trash in the bins and no students in the dormitories, Filch also proposed that students wear shoe covers all the time. This reminded Rolf of his childhood computer lab days. One could only say that Filch would be a master at building civilized cities. Some problem students also became the focus of attention. The twins, needless to say, Harry, Ron, and Malfoy, the trio, needed close surveillance. Just imagine them, fighting, driving flying cars, or, like second years, smearing feces on the walls of the corridors and having a feces fight in the toilets, in front of the students of Boxburtons and Durmstrang. Professor McGonagall shuddered at the thought and couldn't help but want them to take a long sick leave. What, not sick? Break their legs first, then give them some medicine, and St. Mungo's won't refuse them. Neville and Seamus were also under close surveillance. One could blow up several cauldrons in a single class, the other could blow up anything. They were practically the Hogwarts demolition duo. As time passed, October 30th finally arrived. That day, no one paid attention in class, everyone endured the night, rushing to the foyer as night fell. The four heads of the house were directing their students into lines. Surprisingly, Professor Sprout, always covered in mud, had changed into a clean robe, and Professor Snape had washed his hair, looking less greasy. However, he stood beside Dumbledore, seemingly unhappy, clearly forced by the headmaster. After lining up, the students waited patiently near the foyer. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait long. Professor Dumbledore called out, if I'm not mistaken, the representatives from Boxburtons have arrived." The students eagerly looked in different directions, and someone shouted, "In the sky!" Everyone quickly looked up at the night sky. At that moment, a bright white moon hung high in the dark sky, surrounded by a cluster of stars. Below the moon, a colossal object rapidly swept across the black lake, flying towards the castle, growing larger and larger. It was a massive, pale blue carriage, constructed of gleaming oak and gilded metal, with 12 orange glowing glass lanterns hanging from its sides. 12 winged divine horses pulled it through the air, each with a string of gold and bronze bells around its neck. A gentle breeze caused the bells to tinkle rhythmically. All the students stared wide-eyed, stunned by the luxurious carriage. The carriage quickly landed in front of the castle, leaving deep ruts. In the blink of an eye, the carriage came to a stop. The golden divine horses shook their enormous heads, their fiery red eyes darting around. The bells on the carriage jingled incessantly, then gradually faded away. Finally, the wizard opened the carriage door bearing the mark of a crossed wand. A girl in a light blue robe jumped down, bent down, and groped her way through the carriage floor before opening a golden spiral staircase. She gracefully leaped back, and a gleaming black high-heeled shoe emerged from the carriage. Everyone gasped at the sight of the shoe. It was as big as a small sled. How tall must someone be to wear such a size? Soon, a witch gracefully stepped down from the carriage. She was very tall, with a beautiful face and large, dark eyes like black pearls. Her hair was carefully styled and tied into a shimmering bun at the nape of her neck. Maxim was dressed from head to toe in a black satin garment, and her neck and large fingers were adorned with many precious jewels. Madame Maxim was undoubtedly a rare beauty, but her height was truly astonishing. Dumbledore began to clap, and the astonished Hogwarts students joined in, many standing on tiptoe to get a better look at the woman. Maxim smiled faintly, extending a gleaming hand. Although Dumbledore was also tall, he barely bent down to kiss this hand. "Dear Mrs. Maxim," Dumbledore said, looking up, "Welcome to Hogwarts, Professor Dumbledore," Mrs. Maxim said in a deep voice. "I hope you are well." "Very well, thank you for your concern," said Dumbledore. "These are my students," Mrs. Maxim said, waving a large hand behind her. About a dozen or so students, boys and girls, had alighted from the carriage and were now standing behind Mrs. Maxim. They were all around 18 or 19 years old, seemingly aware of the cold weather, and were wrapped in thick cloaks. Only one girl stood out in the crowd. She was short, looking more like 8 or 9 years old. Everyone was momentarily stunned. Was that person either naturally short or a first-year wizard, someone capable of participating in the Triwizard Tournament, a genius? Madame Maxim glanced at the Hogwarts students and asked, "Has Karkaroff arrived? If all goes well, he'll be here any time," Dumbledore said. "Would you like to wait here to greet him, or go inside and warm up?" "Let's go inside and warm up," Madame Maxim said. "But those spellhards, our master of protecting magical creatures, Hagrid, will be happy to look after them." Dumbledore smiled. "He'll be back after dealing with a minor mishap. Something else he has to look after has gone wrong." Hearing Dumbledore's words, the students laughed gleefully. Hagrid's Blastale had escaped its cage, and he was dealing with it now. Hearing Dumbledore's words and seeing the Hogwarts students laughing, Madame Maxim clearly doubted whether this teacher named Hagrid could handle the job. "My spirit horses are picky eaters. They only drink single malt whiskey. Only a true professional can take good care of them." Mrs. Maxim looked around and asked, "Where's Rove? Let him come. He was eyeing my spirit horses back in Boxburton's months ago. I believe he can take good care of my darlings." Hearing the Boxburton's headmaster say this, the students whispered amongst themselves, a buzzing sound filling the air. They hadn't expected the Boxburton's headmaster to know Rove and specifically request his services. Everyone couldn't help but look towards the Hufflepuff phalanx. The students in front of Rove also moved aside, revealing him completely to the crowd. Seeing the handsome young man, the Boxburton students stirred, especially the short student. Maxim's face immediately broke into a smile, and she waved to Rove. Under everyone's gaze, Rove could only reluctantly wave back. Chapter 562 Hibiscus and Gabrielle. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Ralph walked forward, the Hufflepuff students making way for him, whispering among themselves. The boy quickly reached Maxim, and the witch again extended her arm. He took her hand and gently kissed the back of it. Maxim's hands were adorned with rings dazzling enough to dazzle, just like Dumbledore's. Was this standard attire for headmasters? After the kiss, Maxim took Ralph's hand, looked him over carefully, and said gently, "Ralph, it's been several months since we last met in Berlin. I heard about the Quidditch World Cup in France. Were you alright, MRS?" "Maxim, thank you for your concern," Ralph said politely. "I was lucky enough to escape that disaster." "That's good." Maxim breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. "I was so worried. Seeing you safe and sound today puts my mind at ease." Maxim's attentive care made many Hogwarts students feel a surge of goodwill towards this headmistress of Boxburton's. Beauty inside and out, that's the perfect description of her, isn't it? But they were clearly still young. Amidst this tender scene, Maxim lowered her voice, teasing in a tone only the professors could hear, "Rolf, how come wherever you go, trouble follows? Professor Dumbledore, I'm quite worried about the safety of the Triwizard Tournament." Indeed, upon reflection, the professors realized that wherever Rolf went, disaster seemed to follow. Ah, so he was the root of all evil. Rolf smirked, regretting that he had simply stolen Maxim's emerald when he kissed her hand and given it to the Nifflers as a toy. After her teasing remark, Maxim turned to face the group of Boxburton students. Pointing at Ralph, she proclaimed, "You all see clearly now, Ralph Scamander, it's him who stopped the flying dragon ship from crashing a few months ago, saving Boxburtons. You've come to Hogwarts with me today. You may not become heroes of Boxburtons, but you cannot fail to know Scamander." After Maxim's words, Ralph, already the center of attention, felt even more intensely the burning gazes of the Boxburton students. Especially the witches, who seemed ready to devour him alive. The young wizards of Hogwarts also began to whisper amongst themselves. They had indeed heard of Ralph's rescue of the flying dragon ship, but they assumed it only involved representatives from various countries, not Boxburtons. Seeing that the atmosphere was just right, Maxim's eyes flashed with cunning, and he said loudly, "Of course, thank you, but don't forget, Scamander will be your biggest competitor in this Triwizard Tournament. Whoever can beat him will receive an extra 1,000 galleons on top of the tournament's own prize." Ralph was speechless. Maxim was already starting to stir up trouble for him, and in front of students from both schools at that. However, he still smiled brightly and said amiably, "MRS. Maxim, you probably won't have the chance to come up with your 1,000 galleons." "What, so confident?" Maxim glanced at him with a half-smile and said, "You haven't even fought yet, and you think none of our Boxburton students can defeat you. It's not confidence, it's a lack of confidence." Ralph smiled slightly and said, "There are at least 800, if not 1,000, students at Hogwarts who are better than me. A student as ordinary as me is unlikely to become a champion, so wouldn't that be why I've run into them?" Hearing Ralph's words, the Hogwarts students couldn't help but laugh. Although it sounded fake, everyone felt comfortable hearing it. But in the spirit of friendship first, competition second, Ralph seized the opportunity. "Why don't you take out 1,000 galleons and make an extra bet? Whoever wins in the end, it's theirs, you little rascal." Maxim's face showed a mischievous smile. She nodded and said, "Sure, but my rune horses, during the Tree Wizard tournament, I'll make sure they were well fed and plump," Ralph assured her. Ideally, he could get a few female rune horses pregnant, so they could add some biodiversity to his black box before they leave next year. Of course, Ralph didn't say this out loud, otherwise Maxim might have shown him what true biodiversity was. "Alright, those rune horses are yours, Professor Dumbledore." "We'll go in first," Maxim said. Dumbledore nodded. "MRS. Maxim, I'll have Professor McGonagall lead you and your students to the foyer to rest." The Hogwarts students parted to make way, and Professor McGonagall walked beside Maxim, leading the Boxburtons group toward the foyer. At the back of the Boxburtons group followed two students, one tall and one short, their faces obscured by thick scarves wrapped around their heads. As they ascended the steps, they couldn't help but turn and glance at Ralph. The shorter wizard called out in a clear, childlike voice, "Ralph." "I'm here." Hearing the familiar voice, Ralph grinned. "Gabrielle, see you in the Great Hall later." "Yes, yes." Gabrielle tugged at the witch's cloak in front of her, jumping up and down excitedly. "Sister, it's Ralph, I see him." "Gabrielle, keep your voice down and mind your manners," Fleur scolded in a low voice. Gabrielle indeed quieted down, following quietly behind her sister, but still couldn't help turning back to look at Ralph frequently. Fleur also looked at Ralph, waving her arm gently at him, and the boy nodded in response. In the Gryffindor group, Seamus stood on tiptoe, watching Fleur's back, and clicked his tongue. Just from her voice, you can tell she's a beauty. Where does Ralph know so many pretty witches? A nice voice doesn't mean she's ugly, Ron couldn't help but retort. Ron, but that girl has a graceful figure, an elegant back, and that voice, she's definitely a top-tier beauty. There's no way I'm wrong, Seamus said confidently. Top-tier beauties aren't that common, Ron said. Maybe if she lifts her scarf, she'll have buck teeth and a freckled face. I bet you're beautiful. I bet a galleon on the witch who greeted Ralph, Seamus said angrily. Do you dare to bet? Ron, don't bet, Harry advised, knowing that Ron didn't have a galleon. But the crowd, always eager for drama, cheered wildly. Ron, for his part, was easily swayed and quickly succumbed, shouting, "Fine, let's bet." After the Boxburton students left, Ralph looked at the headmaster and whispered, "Professor Dumbledore, shall I settle these rune horses?" Dumbledore smiled and said, "Go ahead. You can park the carriage at the edge of the Forbidden Forest." Ralph nodded, walked to the pink-blue carriage, and floated down onto the back of one of the rune horses. The boy pulled on the reins, and the rune horse neighed, raising its hooves before slamming them down with a thunderous roar. Ralph gently flicked the reins, and the rune horses immediately responded, dragging the giant carriage away into the distance. The clatter of hooves shook the earth, and dust billowed along the road. The terrified crowd stared, dumbfounded, at the boy on horseback. Chapter 563 Gabrielle, sister, why are you blushing? Maxim asked Ralph to look after the divine horse, and Ralph readily agreed. However, when it came to actually doing the work, a fatal problem arose. The divine horse wouldn't drink water, only single malt whiskey, and Ralph didn't have any. He himself didn't like drinking, and his assistant, Sherry, was a typical example of someone with a low alcohol tolerance and even worse drinking manners, so naturally, she wouldn't keep any in her trunk. Ralph had no choice but to ride the divine horse to Hogsmeade. But the pub only sold low alcohol drinks to students, not strong spirits. Given Ralph's reputation, providing him with a bottle of whiskey for a few sips wouldn't be out of the question, but he wanted 10 barrels at once. Who would dare sell that? Well, someone actually did. Aberforth happily cleared out his inventory. It just goes to show, having the headmaster as a backer makes things so easy. After buying the whiskey, Ralph returned to Hogwarts and chose a scenic spot to park the carriage. He summoned a black trunk, untied the reins, led the herd of roan horses inside, cut hay for them, and placed whiskey inside. Only after finishing all this did he leave the trunk. Just as Rove was about to return to the great hall, he suddenly heard barking in the distance. He turned to see Tooth barking incessantly at him. Behind it, Hagrid's cabin was on fire, thick smoke billowing into the sky. Rove quickly flew over, and under his magical control, a light rain began to fall, quickly extinguishing the fire, though wisps of damp smoke still rose from the roof. After the fire was extinguished, Tooth wagged its tail and darted over, seemingly wanting to claim credit and ask for treats. The boy grabbed its ear and asked, "Tooth, did you start the fire?" Tooth sat down on its hind legs, letting out an angry low bark. Seeing this, Rove dismissed Tooth. When Toothpick gets caught doing something naughty, he'll wag his tail and nuzzle the wizard, squinting at their expression and pawing at the air with his front paws. His body language alone proves that Toothpick isn't the arsonist. Ralph heard a crashing sound from inside the cabin. He waved his wand, the door sprang open, and a meter-long blast-tailed snail shot out, its tail spitting flames like a rocket. A thin shell appeared on its body, and its tail, like a venomous snake, darted towards Ralph's chest. Ralph nimbly dodged to the side, a dragon crystal dagger appearing in his hand. He hurled it like a dart. With a muffled thud, the dagger struck the blast-tailed snail on the ground. It struggled a few times like a fish on a hook, a few thin streams of red blood flowing from its body, and then lay still. Toothpick, already terrified, had run a mile away. Seeing the blast-tailed snail dead, he rushed back in a panic. It bit the carcass of the blubber snail, shaking it wildly and growling menacingly, a perfect example of a dog abusing its master's power. Hagrid, hearing the commotion, ran over from the pumpkin patch in the distance, his face pale. "What happened?" he asked. "Hagrid, your cabin was just set on fire by this blubber snail," Rove said. "Where were you?" "I was fixing the cage," Hagrid sighed. "The blubber snails have all escaped. They're everywhere. They're thriving, but they're a bit mischievous, Hagrid. If you don't give up on them, next time it might not just be your cabin that burns down," Rove warned. "But I'm the mother of the Blastales," Hagrid shook his head. "I can't let them go into the Forbidden Forest. They're still small, they'll be eaten by other magical creatures. You can give them to me," Ralph said with a friendly smile. "Didn't I take one of the Blastales with me last time? I discovered that Thunderbirds surprisingly like to eat, cough cough, I mean, they like to eat with Blastales, and they get along very well. With me, Thunderbirds will protect the Blastales from being bullied." Hagrid seemed thoughtful, his resolve softening slightly. He asked curiously, "Ralph, what are you doing here?" "I'm here to arrange the carriages for Boxburton's School of Magic." Ralph pointed to the pinkish-blue house in the distance. "Hagrid, let's go to the Great Hall together. Once you meet Madame Maxim, the headmistress of Boxburton's, you'll forget about these damned Blastales." "No way," Hagrid scoffed. "Ralph, you also live in Fertile Plains. You should know about my family. My father was such a good man, but my mother abandoned him and me the moment she met a stronger man. This is what women do, they either lie, die, or leave you." Hagrid looked hurt and said, "Because of my mother, I have looked away since I was a child." "What Maxim? I dare say he can't even compare to half a hair of a fire dragon or a squid." "Hey, what are you doing?" Ralph waved his magic wand and explained with a smile, "I am using magic to preserve what you just said. Whether you save it or not, I won't change my mind." Hagrid's voice buzzed. The two of them suddenly stopped talking and turned to look into the distance. In the middle of the Black Lake, a large ship suddenly appeared. It looked like a ghost ship, with a tattered hull and a dim, foggy light shining through the portholes. "Oh, Durmstrang's students are here." Ralph looked towards the direction of the castle and said softly, "I'm going back, Hagrid. Come quickly, don't miss the dinner." "Well, you have fun." When Luofu returned to the castle, the students had already returned to the auditorium. He carried the box and strode in. The Hogwarts students were seated at their respective house tables, while the Boxburtons and Durmstrang representatives gathered at the entrance, seemingly unsure where to sit. When Ralph entered the Great Hall, the representatives from both schools fell silent, unable to resist looking at him. Crumb, his face beaming with excitement, walked towards him. However, a faster figure had already rushed over before him. Gabrielle, with lightning speed, broke away from Fleur, ran quickly to Ralph, stopped abruptly, and seemed unsure what to say. Finally, She simply puffed out her chest and sweetly called out, "Ralph." Ralph gazed at Gabrielle, patted her head, and smiled, his eyes crinkling. "You've grown so much taller in a year." Yes, Gabrielle's little face was full of pride, but soon her expression turned sour, for she realized the height difference between herself and Ralph had widened even further. Standing next to him, she looked like a child. Fleur walked over, and Ralph, seeing her bundled up like a giant dumpling, smiled and asked, "Is it that cold?" "It's much warmer inside the auditorium," Fleur replied, gazing at Ralph with gratitude. "Luckily, you reminded Gabrielle and me in your letter to wear extra layers, otherwise we would have been freezing." "You're welcome," Ralph invited. "If you don't mind, you can make do with our academy's dining table." "No problem, no problem." Gabrielle craned her neck, her face full of anticipation. "Sister, let's go quickly." Fleur nodded, reaching up to untie her scarf, revealing a stunning face. Her large, deep blue eyes softened her strikingly beautiful features. Her long, silver hair cascaded down her shoulders like a waterfall, flowing down her back to her waist. The previously noisy auditorium seemed to freeze, instantly falling silent as many male students stared blankly at Fleur. Fleur ignored the stares, took Gabrielle's hand, and followed Ralph towards the Hufflepuff table. Gabrielle tugged at Ralph's sleeve. He turned to see her reach out, seemingly wanting to hold her hand. Ralph smiled, glanced at Fleur, then at Ravenclaw, and didn't reach out, only pinching Gabrielle's cheek before continuing towards the table. Fleur, her cheeks slightly flushed, took a soft breath, then glared at Gabrielle. The little girl felt a pang of grievance. When she used to walk with her parents, they would each hold one of her hands, never knowing her sister's face would turn so red. Chapter 564 The Hogwarts Dinner. Fleur and Gabrielle followed Ron to the Hufflepuff table, and the Booksburton students excitedly followed. Durmstrang sat at the Slytherin table, but nobody cared about them now, not even the famous star of the group, Krum. Most of the boys' eyes were on the Hufflepuff table, scrutinizing Fleur sitting next to Ron. "That girl is so pretty. I think she's comparable to Ravenclaw's Shirley Swinton." Ron stared intently at Fleur, his mouth slightly open, and said in a hoarse voice, "Harry, why don't we have such a beautiful witch in Gryffindor?" This scathing attack undoubtedly angered the Gryffindor girls, who glared angrily at Ron's lecherous expression. Having been constantly bombarded with criticism from Sherry, they had developed a strong resilience, and now with another stunningly beautiful Booksburton's girl appearing, they were actually quite resilient and could accept it. But accepting it didn't mean they wanted to be called out to their faces and be condescendingly pointed at. Parvati Petty gave him a sarcastic look and said, "Ron, you have a face full of freckles, and you dare to talk about us?" "That's right," Angelina said indignantly. "It's really rude to casually comment on and compare other people's appearances." Even Ginny didn't side with her brother. She said sarcastically, "Ron, you need to learn how to respect others. I won't say you're ugly, or not as good looking as Ron, although that's true." Ron was surrounded by a group of girls. He looked to Harry for help, but Harry didn't want to lose his right to be married for the next 4 years at Hogwarts. So, he pretended not to hear and chatted with George and Fred about a Triwizard tournament. When Ron saw Seamus looking at him, he thought the other was going to help him debate with a group of girls, and he was touched for a moment. To everyone's surprise, Seamus grinned smugly at him. "Ron, I told you she's a top beauty, didn't I? I won. A bet's a bet, you owe me a galleon." Besides discussing the stunning beauty of the silver-haired sisters, their relationship with Ralph also became a hot topic. At the Ravenclaw table, many people focused their attention on Sherry. Besides comparing their looks to see who was more beautiful, they also wanted to find out about this matter. After all, Sherry and Ralph were practically inseparable, their relationship extremely close. She must know the reason, right? Lisa Durpan asked curiously. "Surely, Ralph and that girl seem to know each other well." "Did they know each other before?" The girl with the ponytail nodded and explained. "Ralph and Fleur met on the Mayflower last year, and they've been corresponding frequently this past year." "Fleur? What a strange name," Lisa said, "but she's really beautiful." Shirley turned to look at Fleur, nodded slightly, and smiled calmly. "She is very beautiful." This was the truth. Not a forced compliment. But that was all. At this moment, the professors entered the Great Hall, led by Professor Dumbledore, Professor Karkaroff, and Madame Maxim, followed by the 4 heads of the house. When Booksburton saw Madame Maxim appear, all the students immediately stood up, including Fleur. Her expression was solemn and dignified, looking more like she was attending someone's funeral. Boxbutton's strange behavior made many Hogwarts students laugh. Gabrielle leaned close to Ralph's ear and explained, "It's a custom at Boxbutton's. Students can only sit down after the headmaster. As a sign of respect. Don't you have that at Hogwarts?" "No, we firmly believe that respect comes from the heart, not just out of formality," Ralph chuckled. "But our school also has some strange rituals." "What rituals?" Gabrielle asked curiously. "At the beginning of the school year, the headmaster asks everyone to sing the school song to their favorite melody," Gabrielle exclaimed. "I love that ritual." The little girl then counted on her fingers how many songs she knew, intending to sing them for Ralph, who smiled and patted her head. After the professors were all seated, everyone noticed that 4 seats were empty. Besides Mad-Eye Moody and Hagrid, no one could think of anyone else missing. As Dumbledore stood up, the Great Hall gradually quieted down, his deep voice resonating throughout the room. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, ghosts, and, especially, distinguished guests." Dumbledore smiled at the foreign students. "I welcome you to Hogwarts with great joy, and I hope and believe you will have a comfortable and enjoyable time here. The Triwizard Tournament will officially begin at the end of the banquet," Dumbledore said. "Let us now share this fine food and wine, a symbol of lasting friendship." As soon as the headmaster finished speaking, the plates on the table were instantly piled high with a sumptuous feast: roasted venison with chives, wild boar with pepper, roast goose, roast chicken and pigeon skewers, large lamb chops stewed in almond milk with raisins and onions, crab and shark soup, foie gras soaked in red wine. There were also many foreign dishes from France, Germany, and Northern Europe, as well as some unusual dishes. The classic British dish stargazing was naturally indispensable: garlic chili peppers, spicy stir-fried leeches, salt-baked lizards, cockroach alcohol pot, were also prominently displayed on the table. It could be said that the house elves had gone to great lengths to cater to both British and foreign wizards, as well as those with discerning palates and a penchant for the unusual. On each table sat jugs of mulled wine and chilled ale, passed around among the guests. Gabrielle picked up a piece of crispy roasted pork, dipped it in plum sauce, and happily ate it. Fleur, meanwhile, ladled herself a bowl of soup, took a sip, and commented, "This French fish soup tastes very authentic, no worse than what I had in Paris." Fleur was about to serve Ralph and Gabrielle a bowl when the Hufflepuff students had already eagerly filled their own bowls. And so, a bowl of French fish soup was gone. Fleur looked bewildered. "No problem, unlimited refills." Ralph blinked, then tapped the bowl with his spoon and said, "Another bowl, please." Soon, the bowl was filled with French fish soup again. The house elves played with enthusiasm and elegance, but the sounds of harps, violins, and trumpets were quickly drowned out by laughter and the clinking of glasses. Just then, at the far end of the hall, a door suddenly opened, a gust of cold wind blew in, and the torches blazed brightly. Filch let in 2 new guests. Chapter 565 Goblet of Fire. As wizards entered the Great Hall, everyone looked up from their tables to scrutinize them. Gabrielle's eyes widened, and she asked curiously, "Rover, are those 2 Hogwarts professors too?" "No." Rover, tasting a side of summer vegetables with walnuts, fennel, and crumbled cheese, wiped his mouth and introduced them to her. "The guy with the short, blonde hair is Ludo Bagman. He used to be a hitter for the Wimbledon Hornets, and after retiring, he became the director of the Department of Magical Physical Education. As for the one-eyed wizard, his name is Octavia Akis. He's the director of the Department of International Cooperation at the Ministry of Magic. He looks really strange," Gabrielle said. "Yes," Rover squinted, staring intently at the new director who had succeeded Barty Crouch. Akis was quite old, his face lined with wrinkles, but his hair was as black as night, without a single gray hair. He had a neat black beard, and a piece of black leather covered his left eye, but his right eye was as blue as the summer sky. Fleur picked up a small glass of ale, took a sip, and said thoughtfully, "They're here for the Triwizard Tournament." "That's right," Ralph nodded. "The Triwizard Tournament is organized jointly by these 2 departments, and they set the competition rules. Of course, given Ludo's lazy nature, he'd probably leave most of the work to the International Cooperation Department, only thinking about slacking off himself." Dumbledore rose and went to greet the 2, smiling, "Welcome, friends, please join us for this feast." Ludo and Akis sat down at the head table, and Karkaroff noticed an empty seat next to him. He sized up Akis with his cold eyes, then whispered to Snape, "Severus, whose seat is this?" Snape's face darkened. "Moody, Mad-Eye, Karkaroff stared at Snape in astonishment, hardly believing his ears. "What's that old dog doing here? I'm the defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts," a mocking voice rang out. "What, you have a problem with that, Karkaroff?" Karkaroff turned around in horror, seeing Moody limping towards him. His face turned pale instantly. Moody walked to Karkaroff's side, his normal eye fixed on him, while his demonic eye darted incessantly in its socket, first scrutinizing Snape, then Ludo and Acus. "Karkaroff, it's been a long time." "How many years?" Moody asked in a hoarse voice. Karkaroff stared at him in disbelief, seemingly at a loss for words. 13 years, Moody whispered, reminding him, "The last time we met was in the 10th Inquisition chamber at the Ministry of Magic. I personally escorted you there." Karkaroff's face grew even paler. He said, his voice trembling with fear, "Don't do anything rash. I'm the headmaster of Durmstrang now." "Headmaster?" Moody chuckled. "Remember Crouch?" Karkaroff remained silent. "Of course you remember," Moody sneered. "It took me 6 months to catch you, and Crouch let you go. He's recently been imprisoned in Azkaban because of his Death Eater son. Crouch is the director of cooperation, and he almost became Minister of Magic back then. What does that make of you, Headmaster Durmstrang?" After saying this, the white-haired old man picked up a curved bottle from his waist, took sips, and slurred, "Karkaroff, all I know is that a leopard can change its spots. You'd better not do anything bad under my watchful eye. I'll be keeping a close eye on you." Karkaroff's face turned pale, and he swallowed hard. Moody was like a decrepit old dog, looking very old, toothless, seemingly unable to howl anymore, but even just a glance from him was terrifying. He just wanted to leave the Great Hall. Karkaroff wasn't the only one who wanted to leave the Great Hall. Professor Flitwick did too. Hagrid, who had somehow returned to the Great Hall, had barely sat down when he noticed Maxim, who was almost as tall as him. He stared wide-eyed, as if seeing an alien, his breathing quickening. How could there be such a beautiful witch? "Oh, Merlin, this lady is as lovely as a newborn dragon." Hagrid felt his heart melt. "Hagrid, have a drink to warm yourself up," Professor Flitwick said, offering Hagrid a glass. Hagrid, still staring blankly at Maxim, reached out and grasped the glass, tightly gripping Professor Flitwick's hand. This action caused Professor Flitwick excruciating pain in his fingers. He cried out, "Oh, you're hurting me, Hagrid. Let go, don't squeeze so hard." Hagrid raised the glass, intending to take a sip, but the wine spilled all over Professor Flitwick's head. "Oh, you've got it all over my hair, Hagrid. It's sticky. Get me some tissues and wipe it clean." Hagrid grinned at Maxim, then picked up a fork and accidentally stabbed Professor Flitwick's hand. "Ouch, that hurts." "It's bleeding, Hagrid. Pull that thing out of your hand, you idiot." The entire VIP section erupted in commotion. After a long while, once all the desserts had been served and people had finished with their large glasses of wine, the golden plates were scrubbed clean again. Dumbledore stood up again, a mixture of excitement and nervousness filling the Great Hall, everyone intently watching the headmaster. "The moment has finally arrived," Dumbledore said with a smile. "For the past few months, Mr. Bagman and Mr. Acus have worked tirelessly to arrange the Triwizard Tournament. They will join me, Professor Karkaroff, and Mrs. Maxime as the 5-person judging panel to evaluate the champions' performances." Applause immediately filled the hall. Ludo waved his thanks cheerfully, and Acus rose gracefully and bowed slightly. "As you know, 3 champions will participate in the tournament. They will be selected from the 3 schools," Dumbledore said calmly, looking at the crowd. "These champions will need to complete 3 tasks, testing their magical talent, courage, reasoning ability, and of course, their ability to overcome danger. We will score them based on the quality of each task, and the champion with the highest score will win the ultimate Triwizard Cup." Everyone looked at Dumbledore, more concerned with how the champions would be selected. Fortunately, the headmaster didn't ramble on and got straight to the point. "The selection of the champions is handled by a fair selector, the Goblet of Fire." At this moment, Filch walked towards Dumbledore, carrying a large, jewel-encrusted wooden box. The box looked quite old, and the student stared at it in awe. Dumbledore drew his wand and tapped the lid 3 times. The lid slowly creaked open, revealing a large, roughly carved wooden goblet. The goblet itself was unremarkable, but inside, a blue-white flame flickered. Dumbledore placed the goblet on the lid so that everyone in the Great Hall could clearly see it. Every student who wishes to run for champion must write their name and school on a piece of parchment and drop it into this goblet, Dumbledore said. Students aspiring to be champions can register within 24 hours. Tomorrow night, Halloween night, the goblet will select the names of the 3 students it deems most representative of the 3 schools. Tonight, the goblet will be placed in the foyer, and all students who wish to participate can touch it. One last thing, Dumbledore looked at all the students and said loudly, anyone can register, but, once chosen as a champion by the Goblet of Fire, a powerful and binding magical contract will be formed between you and the goblet. According to the contract, the champion must be present to complete all the matches. Anyone who refuses to participate or abandons the competition will suffer a terrible fate. Upon hearing this, the Great Hall fell silent. It seemed as if everyone had stopped breathing. Remember, Dumbledore looked around, his gaze lingering slightly as it swept over Ralph. Think carefully before you decide whether to commit your name. Once you participate in the competition, there are only 2 outcomes: complete all the tasks, or die. Thanks to Just Love to Wonder and Our Song for their generous donations. Due to the current special circumstances, chapter comments are not displayed, but they can be seen in the back end. Please feel free to leave more comments. Chapter 566 Gabrielle, sister, we can sleep at Ralph's place. Upon hearing Dumbledore mention using the Goblet of Fire to select champions, a mix of worry and joy arose. Those who worried were naturally unaware of the goblet's selection mechanism. Like the Sorting Hat, it grouped young wizards into the 4 houses based on their character, courage, intelligence, loyalty, or cunning. Who knew which quality the goblet favored? Those who rejoiced were happy that champions weren't selected based on academic performance. While this method certainly reflected ability, they felt inadequate. Could the Goblet of Fire truly make them champions? It was better than exams. Who knew they might be exceptionally gifted, 1 in a million magical geniuses, just late bloomers or lacking effective learning methods, delaying their awakening of their talents. Now, with the Goblet of Fire selection, their talents would surely be revealed. In short, quite a few students held this view. They were still at an age where they felt invincible, believing themselves to be the chosen ones. After the banquet, everyone rose and headed towards their respective lounges. Ralph was surrounded by a group of Boxburton's girls who brought many items for him to sign. Signing on wands, books, and photos was somewhat normal. Signing on arms and cheeks was also acceptable. But to pull down his collar, yank out the strap of his pink bra, and ask Ralph to sign on it with lipstick was a bit much. Would Ralph sue him for harassing a minor wizard? The most outrageous thing was that a dark-haired witch wanted Ralph to go somewhere secluded and sign her back. Why not just stamp her buttocks with a Treasure of XX stamp? That would be much more exciting. Ralph saw the crowd growing larger and larger, with Durmstrang students also asking for autographs, and some students even pulling out a dozen items at once, saying they were for friends. He couldn't handle it. Ralph had no choice but to stand up and loudly stop them, saying, "It's already late. Sign autographs tomorrow. You'll be here for a year, there'll be plenty of time later." The Hogwarts students, witnessing this, felt a strange sense of superiority. What was Ralph's autograph so rare? They easily got it whenever they asked him to treat their pets. These Boxburton students were truly uncultured bumpkins. As Ralph squeezed through the crowd, he saw Gabrielle and Fleur engaged in a tug-of-war. "Gabrielle, come back to the Boxburton's carriage with me." "No, sister, you go back first." Gabrielle clung tightly to the table, protesting, "I want to go with Ralph to visit the Hufflepuff Lounge. By the time you're done, the carriage doors will be closed." "Where will you sleep tonight? I can squeeze in with Ralph." Fleur tapped her head lightly with her finger, laughing and joking. "That's the boys' dormitory." "How old are you? Don't you have any shame?" "Then I'll sleep in his black trunk." Gabrielle's eyes darted around, revealing a mischievous glint in them. "Sister, you should come too. Ralph's trunk is quite big." "I'm a little scared to sleep alone." Ralph pretended not to hear, walked over, and asked, feigning ignorance, "What are you two doing?" Gabrielle quickly broke free from Fleur, ran behind Ralph, and hid, saying pitifully, "Ralph, I want to come to your place tonight. I have so much to tell you." "No, Gabrielle, our house has rules that students from other houses can't stay overnight." Ralph laughed. "Come back tomorrow during the day. I'll show you around our house." "That's right, don't cause Ralph any trouble." Fleur, afraid that Gabrielle might say something inappropriate in front of Ralph, raised her eyebrows and said, "Gabrielle, come back with me now, be good." Gabrielle was clearly afraid of her sister, and immediately wilted after being glared at like that. The three of them walked towards the foyer in the Hufflepuff crowd. The Gryffindor and Slytherin students were at the front, and they met again. Malfoy spotted Harry in the crowd at a glance. If it were before, he would definitely have gone over and touched Harry or verbally harassed him, but Malfoy didn't do that today. Instead, he chatted with Krum with an extremely enthusiastic expression and tone, discussing Quidditch with him, and making an appointment to have physical confrontations and practice skills together on the pitch in the future. Malfoy spoke loudly, intending for Harry to hear, but instead of angering Harry, he infuriated Ron. "Ah, that's right, Malfoy's definitely sucking up to Krum," Ron said sarcastically. "I bet Krum has people fawning over him everywhere he goes, so he sees right through Malfoy and won't be friends with him." "Harry, where do you think Durmstrang students sleep?" Ron asked eagerly. "We can offer Krum a bed in our dormitory, Harry." "I'd give him my bed, I can sleep on a cot." Harry was speechless. He knew Ron liked Krum. One night he'd even seen Ron lying in bed, stroking a small statue of Krum. But giving up his bed for Krum and sleeping on a cot himself? That was too humiliating, even more outrageous than Malfoy's. Ron, unaware of Harry's thoughts, suddenly became excited as he saw Krum break away from the Slytherin group and walk towards them. He exclaimed excitedly, "Hey, Krum's here. I want his autographed photo." "You didn't bring your quill, did you, Harry?" "No, they're all in my bag upstairs." Harry shook his head. Ron looked disappointed, but as Krum strode past him with his pigeon-toed gait, he still waved, as if greeting an old friend. Krum seemed not to see Ron, or perhaps simply ignored him, walking straight to the Hufflepuff group. "Mr. Ron Scamander," he called out in a gruff voice. The crowd immediately stopped, all looking at Ron, who was chatting with Fleur and Gabrielle. The boy looked up and asked, "Excuse me, is there something you need?" The Hufflepuff students, seeing Krum's gloomy face, thought he was coming to cause trouble, but instead he asked, "Mr. Scamander, do you remember the night of the Quidditch World Cup final? You saved me," everyone whispered among themselves. They knew Ralph had saved many people that night, but they hadn't expected the famous Krum to be among them. "Oh, it's been too long, I can't remember clearly, but something seems to have happened." Ralph thought for a moment and asked, "Has your injury healed?" He remembered that Krum had been pierced through the groin by a harpy's claw, almost turning him into a one-egg man. "I'm all better now," Krum said excitedly. "You saved my life. I've always wanted to thank you in person and repay your kindness, but I didn't know where you lived. You were so brave, you're too kind. I saved you on a whim, without expecting anything in return." Rove smiled. "A doctor's heart is like a parent's, even if I'm just a veterinarian." "No, I must repay your kindness," Krum insisted. "By the way, I have a sister." Rove was taken aback. Although it was a life-saving favor, there was no need to offer his sister in return. Especially Krum, who was only 18 but looked like he was in his 30s, with a Snape-like hooked nose and thick eyebrows like McKay. How beautiful could his sister be? "Really, no need. She's your sister," Rove refused righteously. "If you keep doing this, I'll get angry." "No," Krum said awkwardly, "I meant, my sister is a fan of yours and wants your autograph." Ralph wiped the sweat from his brow. As long as he didn't offer his sister in return, he'd be happy with anything, even a Treasure of XX stamp. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 567. The referees are all ours. What can they possibly use to fight back? Krum's visit to thank Rolf was just a minor incident. Everyone quickly returned to their respective dormitories to prepare for sleep. However, the students were all preoccupied with the Triwizard Tournament, making a sleepless night inevitable. Even Rolf's dorm was no exception. Justin and Macmillan spent most of the night discussing how to spend their 2,000 galleons after winning the tournament. While others popped champagne at halftime, they were already fantasizing about their celebrations before even entering the arena. Neville also had a nightmare about the Triwizard Tournament. He dreamt he was a champion but forgot to participate in the tournament, and Snape dragged him to the tournament grounds, making him brew the antidote on the spot. Then, Neville, in front of all three school students, blew up the cauldron. When Neville woke up, He saw Justin and Macmillan wrestling and arguing in bed. They had agreed that whoever lost would have to give up becoming a champion. Justin and Macmillan played around all night, but the next morning, still full of energy, they woke Rolf and Neville, urging them to hurry to the Great Hall. It seemed they were too late. The champion's spot had already been snatched up. Their enthusiasm was even more Ravenclaw-like than Ravenclaw's. In fact, it wasn't just Justin and Macmillan who were enthusiastic, most of the young wizards were. When they arrived at the Great Hall, they saw that quite a few students were already seated, eating breakfast while carefully examining the goblet of fire. Reaching the Hufflepuff table, Justin eagerly asked, "Has anyone put their name in yet?" A Durmstrang student, led by Karkaroff, just put their name in, Hannah yawned, sounding sleepy. "But I haven't seen anyone register for Hogwarts yet." "Are you going to register, Justin?" I'll wait a bit longer." Justin hesitated. After all, being the first to register would be too embarrassing if the Goblet of Fire picked their name. "What are you thinking, Susan?" Hannah suddenly exclaimed. Susan withdrew her hand, laughing sheepishly. "I see you still have a lot of empty space on your paper. Can you share half with me?" "No." Hannah shook her head. "You're such a cheapskate," Susan pouted. "You can write 100 names on this paper. What's wrong with giving me a little scrap?" "No means no," Hannah insisted, protecting her paper. "I bought this from Professor Trelawney for 20 gallons. She's already blessed it. It has magical powers. I can't give it to you." Hearing about the blessed paper, everyone curiously gathered around, wanting to see just how magical it was. Rove smirked. Professor Trelawney was even cheating children out of their money. She had completely disgraced Cassandra. As an elder, Rove was inexplicably furious, wishing he could confiscate all the money she had cheated. Not only Hannah, but many students used magical paper. Some smeared it with garlic, others with silver powder, all driven by superstition. A group of young wizards banded together, writing their names on a piece of paper, ready to toss it into the Goblet of Fire. One name might not be as good as another, but if they all joined together, they'd surely win. Anyone watching would think they were participating in a group buying frenzy. After finishing breakfast, Ralph, seeing he had plenty of time, left the Great Hall alone, put down his box at his usual spot, and went inside. He quickly arrived at a wooden hut, pushed open the door, and saw a row of cauldrons gurgling. On the shelves on both walls were various magical materials and bottled potions. Ralph sat down at a table, took out a stack of parchment, and began writing wizards' names. Just as he finished, he heard footsteps at the door. The boy looked up and saw Sherry and Hermione walking together along the lakeside path. Hermione entered the hut, looking left and right, up and down, searching for something. "Hermione, didn't find it, did you?" Shirley smiled and said, "You lost? You'll need to feed the Matra rats for me later." Hermione hummed twice, but seemed quite happy. "What are you two doing?" Ralph asked, puzzled. "I didn't see you in the Great Hall." "Neville said you went out after breakfast." Shirley laughed. "I said you were definitely in the trunk by yourself, but Hermione said you went to find the Delacour sisters, so we made a bet, and I won." Ralph sighed softly. "You too." The girl with the ponytail smiled sweetly at him. Seeing Ralph fiddling with potions, she moved a small chair over and sat down beside him, holding the bottle for him. "Ralph, did you put your name in the Goblet of Fire?" Hermione asked. "Not yet." Ralph put the cap back in the bottle and said softly, "There's a whole day, no rush." "Have you two voted?" "No." Sherry shook her head. "Hermione and I aren't planning to vote." "Yeah." Hermione pulled up a chair, sat down next to Sherry, rocked back and forth, and said with a pained expression, "We have absolutely no chance of competing with you to become a champion, so voting is pointless." "That's not a problem." Ralph's tone remained calm and composed. "I'm just asking if you want to become champions. If you do, I can make you champions." Sherry knew Ralph had this ability, and she didn't doubt it. The girl was just worried. "Isn't that a foul? Won't the school and the Department of Mystics cause you trouble?" "Sherry, cheating has always been a tradition in the Triwizard Tournament. Everyone knows it." Ralph laughed. "It's like a night stroll. As long as you don't get caught in the act, you can do whatever you want." "Then how can you make us both champions?" Hermione asked curiously. "Isn't each school only allowed one student? Then let the Goblet of Fire mistakenly believe you're students from other schools, like Evamori, and since you're the only one who signed up, you'll definitely be the champion." "But how can we make the Goblet of Fire misunderstand?" "Use an extremely powerful confusion charm, or..." Ralph gently shook the potion in his hand, saying, Use this." Sherry and Hermione stared at the potion. "This potion is called a bewitching potion. Soak a piece of paper with your name on it in the potion, then drop it into the goblet of fire. It will be fooled by the bewitching potion's effects," Ralph explained. "No wonder you had me brew this potion when school started," Hermione said excitedly. The potion's recipe was more complex than Polyjuice potion, and Hermione had always been curious about its purpose. It turned out it was to bewitch the goblet of fire. "That's right," Ralph smiled. "I'm also planning to help others become champions," the boy said, taking the stack of names from the table and handing them to the two girls. Seeing the name at the top, Sherry and Hermione exchanged a surprised glance. "This, him?" Hermione asked in a trembling voice. "Rover. Does Professor Dumbledore know? Who do you think gave me this potion formula?" Rover chuckled calmly. "I spoke with Professor Dumbledore about it when I was in Berlin. It was a rather subtle conversation, but he immediately gave me the potion." "This is insane. They started the war," Rover said seriously. "People die in the Triwizard Tournament. It would be abnormal if they didn't. Let them die. Don't worry, the referees are ours, the arena is ours, and even the rules are ours. What can they possibly do against us?" Chapter 568 Sirius's Advice. When Harry and Ron arrived at the Great Hall, they saw a large, sloth-like boy tossing names into the goblet of fire. Harry recognized the boy as Warrington, a Slytherin student and the chaser for the Slytherin Quidditch team. Last term, Warrington had hit Harry on the head with a quaffle, nearly ending his season. "So," Harry sneered, "we can't let a Slytherin be a champion." "Yeah," Ron chimed in, asking loudly, "Has anyone from our house signed up?" "Angelina and Arya have already signed up," Seamus said excitedly, waving his slip of paper. "I'm going soon too. Do you want to come, Harry?" "Let's go too," Ron asked eagerly. "Let's wait a bit." Harry hadn't really decided whether to put his name in the goblet of fire. He certainly wanted to be a champion, but with Ron around, he felt he had no chance, so why bother? Just then, about 100 owls flew into the Great Hall. They circled the tables until they found their owners, tossing letters or packages onto their laps. Harry also received a letter. Ron asked, "Whose letter is it?" "Hagrid's." Harry tore open the envelope, glanced at it quickly, and frowned. "He wants me to go to the cabin right now. He needs to see me urgently." Hagrid usually wrote to invite people to afternoon tea, rarely mentioning urgent matters. So Harry and Ron immediately left the Great Hall, hurrying across the fields towards the edge of the Forbidden Forest. As they approached the cabin, they suddenly realized that Hagrid's house was completely blackened, as if it had been burned. Harry grew increasingly anxious, rushing towards the cabin. Reaching the door, he pounded on it, shouting, "Hagrid, are you all right? Are you hurt?" A low bark came from inside, followed by Hagrid's growl, "Coming. Back off, Fang." "Stop barking." The door creaked open, and Harry looked up, instantly frozen in shock, speechless. He had imagined Hagrid suffering third-degree burns, his body wrapped in bandages, half his face disfigured. But the Hagrid before him was not only unburned, but also impeccably dressed, a fluffy brown suit paired with a flamboyant plaid tie. Most bizarrely, Hagrid's hair, he seemed to have used copious amounts of machine lubricant to tidy it up, leaving it neatly combed into two slicked back sections, looking utterly bizarre. Harry realized then that Hagrid hadn't been burned, but rather his brain had been damaged by the smoke from the fire, or so he thought. "Hagrid, what happened to you?" Harry asked. "Oh, I just suddenly felt like I was at the age where I should dress up," Hagrid stammered. "Besides, the Triwizard Tournament is happening at Hogwarts right now, and as a professor, I need to make a good impression on the students and teachers of other schools." Harry was skeptical that this might have the opposite effect, but he still went against his conscience and complimented, "Oh, you look pretty good." "Really?" Hagrid scratched his head, surprised that Harry and he had the same taste. He'd give him some men's lubricant to take home later. Ron stared at Hagrid's odd hairstyle, his mouth agape as if about to offer a critique, but Harry quickly interrupted, "Hagrid, what happened to your house?" "Oh, last night the bobtails broke the cages and ran around everywhere, burning my house down," Hagrid explained. "Luckily, Ron happened to be passing by and put the fire out." "Where are those bobtails?" "In the pumpkin patch," Hagrid said cheerfully. "I reinforced the cages. Those little rascals definitely can't escape." Harry was once again skeptical of Hagrid's explanation. He frowned. "You wrote to me saying you had urgent business. What is it?" "It's not me who needs to see you." Hagrid stepped aside, grinning. Look who's here. Harry looked into the house, his eyes widening. He exclaimed excitedly, Sirius, Lupin. What brings you two here? Professor Dumbledore sent us. Sirius strode over, smiling. He wrote that Hogwarts might need some security personnel lately, so Remus and I came together. Is it about the Triwizard Tournament? Yes, Lupin smiled. But I can't tell you the specifics. Just wait, you'll be very surprised. Harry and Ron exchanged a glance. They didn't know what could possibly surprise them about the Triwizard Tournament. By the way, where's Ralph? Sirius asked. I wrote to him too, but the owls couldn't find his location. Ron suddenly remembered something and said enviously, he's probably with Delacour. Delacour, yeah, the schoolgirl from Boxbuttons. Ron's eyes glazed over. She's incredibly beautiful, and it seems she and Ralph have known each other for a while. They were sitting together at the dinner party last night. Prettier than Sherry? Sirius asked incredulously. Almost, Ron exclaimed excitedly. I bet that girl is a Vila. It's no surprise that Ron attracts Vilas, Lupin chuckled. His face is just too alluring. Hagrid began to make tea, and they sat down at the table, quickly resuming their discussion of the Triwizard Tournament. You guys are really lucky, Lupin said enviously. We also had rumors about restarting the Triwizard Tournament. But Boxbuttons and Durmstrang probably thought England was too dangerous and rejected the proposal. Sirius took a sip of his shizo tea and casually asked, Harry, do you want to be a champion? Who wouldn't? Ron said impatiently. Being a champion is such an honor. Harry hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I do want to, but with my abilities, it's probably difficult. If you want to be a champion, you can ask Ron for help, Sirius whispered. Ask Ralph for help, Harry asked doubtfully. I can't just tell Ralph not to participate, and even if he doesn't, I might not become a champion. No, that's not what I meant, Sirius said. Ralph can make others champions, although I don't know how he does it yet. Harry and Ron exchanged a shocked glance. They both knew Ralph was very capable, but he couldn't just make anyone a champion, could he? That was too outrageous. Harry fell silent, seemingly hesitant. After a moment, he looked up and asked, if it were Dad, would he participate? Sirius and Lupin both laughed. Sirius looked into Harry's eyes and said seriously, Harry, for James, only adventure is fun. Of course he would participate, even though he was only a first-year student at the time. Then I'll participate, Harry nodded. I'll ask Ralph for help. That's good, Sirius smiled. After chatting for a while, Harry and Ron got up to leave. Hagrid followed to get the lubricant, intending to give it to Harry. Once the room quieted down, Lupin looked worried and said, is it really a good idea to send Harry to the Triwizard Tournament? The Death Eaters are more active than usual, since Dumbledore has decided. Sirius shrugged, looked towards the door, and calmly said, I believe he can protect Harry. Chapter 569 Sherry and Fleur's Meeting. After soaking each list in a potion, Ralph led Sherry and Hermione away from the box and returned to the Great Hall. The Great Hall was now even more crowded, everyone still seated at the tables, their eyes glued to the Goblet of Fire. Ralph didn't understand what was so interesting about the Goblet of Fire. It was just a rickety wooden cup. At that moment, Maxim, with her students, walked through the foyer into the Great Hall. The young wizards surrounding the Goblet of Fire stepped back to let them pass, watching them intently. Boxbuttons students lined up, tossing their parchments into the blue-white flame one by one. Each name thrown into the flame quickly turned red, sparking a few flecks. Mrs. Maxim stood to the side, looking down over the Great Hall, when she suddenly spotted Ralph in the crowd, and also the girl in blue standing beside him, carrying a black box. Maxim gazed at the girl, a hint of undisguised amazement flashing in his eyes. Maxim had always been confident in Fleur's beauty, believing that no girl in the 11 magic schools could rival her. After all, she possessed Vila blood. But this ponytail girl before him was even 3 points more beautiful than Fleur. Maxim, who had originally intended to have the students return to the carriage, glanced at Fleur, suddenly grinned mischievously, and waved his hand, saying, everyone, feel free to do as you please. You can visit Hogwarts, or make some new friends. Oh, right, didn't some of you want to get Scamander's autograph? Maxim pointed in the distance and laughed. Look, he's standing right there, go on. The students looked in the direction the headmaster pointed and indeed saw Ralph, naturally noticing the two girls beside him. One of them had an ordinary appearance, and her hair was a mess of fluff, so she was completely ignored by everyone. All eyes were focused on the girl with the ponytail. The girl possessed an absolutely stunningly beautiful face. Her simple blue robe accentuated her refined and serene, like a clear spring, unforgettable at first glance. Hibiscus also fixed her gaze on Shirley. She had seen Shirley's photo last summer on the Mayflower. She was immediately captivated, but back then Shirley looked somewhat thin. Now, that was completely gone, and her figure was more striking than her peers. Gabrielle, on the other hand, scrutinized Shirley with a critical eye, especially noticing she was carrying Rove's suitcase, and gave a rather unladylike smirk. However, after a long, critical look, the young woman couldn't find any flaws in Shirley's appearance. Instead, she felt somewhat overwhelmed, which made her quite discouraged. It seemed that taking Rove's assistant position back from this woman would be a bit difficult. Shirley, who had been chatting with Rove, suddenly sensed the change in atmosphere. She turned her head and saw the group of Boxburton students staring at her. Shirley automatically ignored the boy's initial, habitual amazement at her, and keenly focused her gaze on the most outstanding girl in the opposite group. The girl with the ponytail and Fleur exchanged a glance, and Shirley, who was usually quiet in front of strangers, now smiled slightly and gracefully. Fleur smiled back, then took Gabrielle's hand and walked towards the three of them. Gabrielle was even more furious that Shirley had ignored her. If she shared this thought with Hermione, the two of them could have a long, sarcastic chatter. Ralph quickly introduced the three girls and the little girl to each other. In fact, they had seen each other's photos before, so they could all recognize each other. The witches who had been eager to get Ralph's autograph just now were no longer willing to go. After all, with Shirley and Fleur standing beside them, going over there would only make them look like stones. No one wanted to humiliate themselves. Maxim's gaze swept between Fleur and Shirley, and he couldn't help but laugh. When women of vastly different appearances fight over a man, it's usually the lower-ranking woman who humiliates herself. But if the difference in appearance isn't too great, it's like a clash of titans. So why are you all laughing and joking? Hurry up and draw your wands, let's fight. However, instead of fighting, the group harmoniously discussed the Triwizard Tournament. Have you put your names in yet? Fleur asked. Not yet, Ralph laughed. We were just about to go. You guys chat here. Sherry, Hermione, I'll put yours in for you. Ralph took the box from Sherry, walked to the Goblet of Fire, opened the trunk, and quickly tossed in a small stack of parchment. Just as the boy was about to turn back, a voice called out, Rolf. Rolf turned around and saw Harry and Ron approaching. He asked, Are you two here to cast your names too? No, Harry shook his head. We're here to see you. Ron turned his expectant gaze away from Sherry and Fleur, looked at Rolf, and lowered his voice. We heard you have a way to make others become champions. Who told you that? Rolf raised an eyebrow. Sirius and Lupin told us, Harry explained. They were just at Hagrid's cabin. We went to see them, and Sirius suggested we ask you for help. Sirius and Remus are here, Rolf said then asked doubtfully, you two want to become champions? Yes, Harry and Ron both nodded. Rolf was somewhat speechless. He had captured Barty Crouch Jr. and helped Harry escape the plot to become a champion, but now he himself wanted to become a champion. But he didn't refuse. These days, you can't just take things halfway, you have to understand the full meaning. How did Sirius and Lupin know that Ron could help others become champions? Besides Sherry and Hermione, only Dumbledore knew. That means Dumbledore must have told Sirius, who then relayed it to Harry. So, it was Dumbledore who wanted Harry to become a champion. Since that's the case, Ron readily agreed. Harry, I can help you. What about me, Ron? Ron hurriedly said, I want to become a champion too. Ron looked at Ron, hesitating. Ron, are you sure you want to participate? Many people have died in the Triwizard Tournament. It's very dangerous. Once you decide to participate, you can't withdraw halfway, and it will be too late to regret it. No, I won't regret it, Ron readily agreed. Harry and I have done so many dangerous things before, we'll definitely be able to finish the Triwizard Tournament this time too. Ron looked deeply at Ron and nodded. Alright, since you've decided, I can help you become a champion. I hope you won't regret it. Chapter 570 The Champions of Hogwarts. As the headmaster of Hogwarts, Dumbledore had three great passions: fishing, boys, and discipline. Dumbledore loved fishing. In the past 3 years, he had used the Philosopher's Stone, defense against the dark arts, and his position as headmaster to catch numerous fish, including Tom, Quirrell, Lockhart, and Malfoy. And these were only those Ralph knew of. The number of fish he didn't know was countless. In short, Dumbledore had held his fishing position at Hogwarts for decades, making him a top-tier player in the fishing world. Dumbledore also had a particular fondness for boys. Grindelwald was a victim in his youth, Newt in his adolescence, and Tom in his middle age. They all received varying degrees of special attention from Dumbledore. And the boys who received Dumbledore's attention seemed cursed, all experiencing very difficult times. Grindelwald needs no introduction. He's currently serving time in Nuremberg. Newt was expelled from Hogwarts, imprisoned in the Magical Congress in America, and nearly killed by Grindelwald. He only turned his luck around by finding a wife, otherwise, his fate wouldn't have been much better than Grindelwald's. Tom is even worse off, now drifting aimlessly, neither human nor ghost. Ralph has also noticed a tendency for him to become Dumbledore's focus in his later years. Therefore, he's now trying hard not to follow in his predecessor's footsteps. As for training, it's naturally the boy who survived the ordeal, Harry Potter. Dumbledore's attention to Harry goes beyond mere observation, it's a deeper level of training. The headmaster is trying to mold Harry into the shape he desires. The most obvious example is the fourth-floor restricted area for first-year students, deliberately luring and allowing Harry to investigate the Philosopher's Stone to cultivate his courage. Therefore, Harry's transformation into a warrior in the Triwizard Tournament is clearly also a result of Dumbledore's covert training. But Dumbledore was training Harry, so why was Ron getting involved? He was the boy who lived, and what was he? Getting too close to someone with such great fortune. Weren't you afraid of getting struck by lightning? However, this wasn't Ron's problem. He was only responsible for assigning the champions, and Dumbledore would take the blame if anything went wrong. So, he decisively tore off a piece of paper with someone's name on it, handed it to Harry and Ron, watched them write their names on it, and then left. When Harry and Ron returned to Gryffindor, they skipped and hopped, as if they had won the lottery. In fact, they weren't the only ones excited. Many students were thrilled. In this strange yet exciting atmosphere, night finally fell, and the Halloween dinner began. The Great Hall was filled with Halloween decorations. A large swarm of live bats flew around the enchanted ceiling, while hundreds of pumpkin figures peered sideways at everyone from every corner. The table was once again piled high with various delicious foods, but this time, the food leaned more towards a dark Halloween theme: bloody rare steak, a vampire corpse made of cake, fried bat wings, roasted pumpkin filled with cans of herring, and French duck necks shaped like mice. However, this was probably the least anticipated Halloween everyone had ever had, with some even complaining that the dinner was taking too long. Anxious expressions appeared on the faces of those in the Great Hall. Everyone was fidgeting, frequently standing up to check if Dumbledore had finished his meal. Finally, the golden plates were once again spotless, and the noise in the Great Hall suddenly rose considerably. Dumbledore stood up, and the Great Hall fell silent once more. He smiled and said, "Very well, the goblet will make its decision. Listen, after the champion's name is announced, he needs to go to the top of the Great Hall, walk along the faculty desk, and enter the room next door." He pointed to the door behind the faculty desk, saying, "The champions will receive their initial instruction there." The headmaster took out his wand and waved it dramatically, extinguishing all the candles except those in the jack-o'-lantern, plunging the Great Hall into dim light. The goblet of fire emitted a dazzling light, brighter than anything else in the Great Hall. Its blue-white flame, sparkling and almost blinding, was almost blinding. Everyone watched, waiting silently. Suddenly, the flame in the goblet turned red again, crackling and sputtering. Then, a tongue of fire shot into the air, and a piece of charred parchment flew out. Everyone in the Great Hall held their breath. Dumbledore caught the parchment and declared in a clear, forceful voice, "Victor Krum, a champion of Durmstrang." Applause and cheers erupted throughout the Great Hall. "Excellent, Victor," Karkaroff roared, his voice booming, audible even amidst the loud applause. "I knew you were destined to be a champion." Krum rose from his Slytherin table, strutting towards Dumbledore. He turned right, walked along the faculty desk, and entered the next room through the door. The applause and chatter subsided, and everyone's attention returned to the goblet. A few seconds later, the flame glowed red again. Propelled by the flame, the second parchment leaped from the goblet. "The champion of Oaksbuttons," Dumbledore said. "Fleur Delacour, sister," Gabrielle exclaimed excitedly. "It's you." Fleur gave a soft hum and stood up, gracefully tossing her silver hair. She smiled at Ralph. "Ralph, I'll be waiting for you inside." Come quickly." With that, Fleur walked towards the room in the distance, under the watchful eyes of everyone. Several Boxburton's girls who hadn't been chosen burst into tears, burying their faces in their arms and sobbing sadly. The Great Hall quickly fell silent again, this time with an overwhelming, almost overflowing, excitement. Because, it was time for the champion of Hogwarts. The students stared intently at the goblet of fire, which quickly turned red again, sparks flying, flames leaping high into the air. Dumbledore pulled a third parchment from the tip of the flames. Dumbledore stared in disbelief at the paper, his expression one of utter astonishment. This look only fueled the students' curiosity about the champion's name. Dumbledore paused for a moment, then announced loudly, "The champion of Hogwarts, Malfoy." The Great Hall fell silent. Students from the other houses stared at Malfoy in disbelief. This, impossible. How could it be Malfoy? Scamander, Cedric, Angelina, so many excellent students, how could Draco Malfoy be chosen as champion? Even Harry and Ron exchanged glances, assuming Ralph had also been chosen for Malfoy. Gabrielle, unable to hide her disappointment but also afraid of upsetting Ralph, tried to comfort her softly. "Ralph, it's all right, it's just a competition." Ralph patted her head and chuckled gently, "No rush." After a moment's hesitation, the Slytherin table erupted in deafening cheers. Although they didn't think Malfoy deserved to be a champion, what could they do when he was a student of their house? Even Snape clapped, half puzzled and half delighted. Malfoy jumped up, chuckled, and then clapped his hands, shouting, "Ee! Good, I'm a champion! I'm a champion! I'm a Hogwarts champion!" He seemed to have gone mad, first hugging Goyle and Crabbe, then clapping his hands and running towards Snape. But Dumbledore raised his arm and said in a deep voice, "Draco Malfoy, you are not the champion is Lucius Malfoy." Draco froze, completely stunned. A deathly silence filled the room. Chapter 571 The Death Eaters Gathering? Upon hearing Dumbledore's words, Malfoy was completely stunned. He stood frozen, his brain in a state of utter overload. He was supposed to be the champion, so how could he suddenly become his father? It felt like he'd just gotten married, the wedding was all set, and just as he was about to consummate the marriage, Dumbledore, the officiant, told Malfoy, "This is your stepmother, your father Lucius's wife, your father is about to enter the bridal chamber." Malfoy couldn't accept this. Even his own father couldn't steal his wife, steal his champion. The other teachers also gathered around, looking at the parchment burned to a mere name, Lucius Malfoy. Everyone was utterly bewildered. Lucius Malfoy had graduated years ago, how could his name have appeared in the Goblet of Fire? Professor McGonagall asked doubtfully, "Did someone put his name in there?" Dumbledore immediately looked at Malfoy and calmly asked, "Malfoy, did you put your father's name in the Goblet of Fire?" No, Malfoy stammered, "I wrote my own name." Even if you were stupid, he wouldn't write his father's name on the marriage certificate. But under everyone's gaze, Malfoy suddenly felt a little insecure. Had he really written Lucius's name? Karkaroff narrowed his eyes, seemingly seeing through everything. A cold smile played on his lips as he sneered, "So Hogwarts is going to have these long-graduated adult wizards compete against my students? Your school really will stop at nothing to win. This is certainly unfair," Maxim echoed. "I would never allow my students to compete against such wizards." "Of course we won't do that," Dumbledore said politely. "This matter will be investigated thoroughly." Before the headmaster could finish speaking, the flame in the Goblet of Fire turned red again. Then, an even more dramatic scene unfolded. 7 or 8 pieces of parchment shot out of the Goblet of Fire like bullets, landing in Dumbledore's hands. The old man stared at the charred pieces of paper and read them aloud. Houghton Goyle, Joey Crabbe, Amicus Carroll, Electo Carroll, Sean Knott, Ada Avery Jr. Karkaroff felt utterly absurd at that moment, for all those names were his old colleagues. For a fleeting instant, he felt this wasn't the true wizard tournament, but a gathering of Death Eaters. Moody realized this too. He didn't speak, only letting out a harsh, mocking laugh. Interesting. If he'd known Hogwarts was this exciting, he would have retired long ago to become the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor. Would that be much more fun than being an Auror at the Ministry of Magic? Snape stood at the back of the group, scrutinizing everyone's expressions, trying to figure out who was behind this bizarre operation. Draco Malfoy was definitely out of the question. Could it be Lucius? But he couldn't possibly infiltrate Hogwarts to do something like this without being discovered by Dumbledore. It couldn't be the Dark Lord himself, could it? Or perhaps Snape stared suspiciously at the bewildered Dumbledore, a strange, inexplicable feeling swirling within him. His intuition told him that this old man was definitely involved. Many young wizards were bewildered. The surnames of these students were familiar, but Hogwarts didn't seem to have any of them. Just then, the goblet of fire, silent for a moment, crackled and sparked again, a long tongue of fire leaping into the air, holding up a piece of parchment. Dumbledore extended a long, slender hand, grasped the parchment, and gently sighed, saying, "It seems normal now." The champion of Hogwarts. Hearing this, everyone stared intently at the headmaster, who announced loudly, "Ralph Scamander." Finally hearing the familiar name, the students all looked towards the Hufflepuff table. Every Hufflepuff jumped up and down, screaming and stomping their feet, congratulating Ralph. Ralph calmly stood up, first glancing at Sherry and Hermione in the distance, then exchanging a knowing look with Dumbledore. Amidst the applause, he walked towards the room in the distance. He quickly passed through the crowd, pushed open the door, and entered the room. The room was small, lit by only a few torches, but the flickering fire from the fireplace illuminated the space. Many portraits of wizards hung on the walls, their faces all turning to look at Ralph. As he entered, they began to whisper amongst themselves. Some portraits quickly departed, seemingly to inform others who the Hogwarts champion was. Crumb, leaning against a mantelpiece, hunched over with his eyes closed, was about to approach Ralph to exchange a few words when he saw him, but Fleur had already gone ahead of him. Fleur came over, tossing her cascading silver hair, and said happily, "Ralph, I knew you'd be the Hogwarts champion. It's me, but not just me." Ralph shrugged and sighed. The goblet of fire seems to have encountered some minor problems. He quickly recounted what had just happened in the Great Hall, leaving Fleur and Crumb looking at each other in disbelief. At that moment, the door opened again, and Sherry and Hermione walked in lightly. Fleur, already aware of the goblet of fire's malfunction, tentatively inquired, "You two have become champions too?" Sherry walked to Ron's side and nodded slightly. "Yes." A moment of silence fell, and the room became quiet. But this silence didn't last long. A large group of people pushed open the door and surged in. Professor Dumbledore, followed closely by Karkaroff, Maxim, Professor McGonagall, and Professor Snape. Harry and Ron were sandwiched in the middle of the crowd. Ludo Bagman exclaimed, "This is bizarre. Absolutely bizarre. So many champions, many of whom graduated years ago. The Triwizard Tournament has been held for 700 years, and this is the first time something like this has happened." Madame Maxim straightened her tall frame, her head touching the candlelit chandelier, her large breasts, clad in black satin, heaving violently. "It's quite bizarre. So what does this mean, Dumbledore?" "I'd like to know as well, madam," said Dumbledore. "But before we discuss that, I'd like you to see this. I just got it from the Goblet of Fire, but I haven't read it aloud for fear of causing a commotion." The professors crowded around, staring at the charred note in Dumbledore's hand, and gasped. It read, "Tom Marvolo Riddle. Chapter 572 There's only one truth." Seeing the ubiquitous name Tom, some might think of Jerry, some of Tom Cruise, some of the leaky cauldron owner, but Karkaroff immediately thought of that man. Even though the Dark Lord had been rumored dead for 13 years, Karkaroff's eyes still widened in terror when he saw the name on the parchment. A conspiracy. "This is definitely a conspiracy." Karkaroff clenched his fists, his voice filled with anger and fear. This conspiracy was aimed at the Death Eaters who had escaped from Azkaban, including himself. "It is indeed a conspiracy, Headmaster Karkaroff." The usually quiet Ralph suddenly spoke, his expression serious. "This conspiracy is the Death Eaters targeting us innocent people." "Huh?" Karkaroff looked at Ralph with suspicion. Everyone turned to look at the boy, who slowly walked to the center of the room and said in a deep voice, "The names that appeared in the Goblet of Fire, they were all accused of being Death Eaters back then, but after a trial by the Ministry of Magic, they were ultimately found innocent. Whether they were truly innocent or not, in the eyes of the real Death Eaters, they were all traitors to the Dark Lord," Ralph said emphatically. "As you all probably know, the disaster at the Quidditch World Cup not long ago was the work of the Death Eaters, without a doubt, not only because of the Dark Mark, but also because I captured a Death Eater, Walton McNeil, who, when captured, was still trying to frame Lucius Malfoy as his accomplice. Fortunately, Malfoy has an alibi, which shows how much the real Death Eaters hate him, hate these wizards who escaped prison and had a peaceful life. And what about us?" Ralph pointed to Sherry and Hermione, then to himself, and sighed. We just happened to stop the Death Eaters' plot that night, and they hate us too. Ralph looked at Harry and said, the boy who survived, needless to say, is hated by the Death Eaters, so, there's only one truth. A deep worry appeared on the boy's handsome face. This is a real conspiracy, a persecution of innocent people like us by the surviving Death Eaters. They made up so many lists, hoping we'd participate in the Triwizard Tournament and then die for it. After Ralph finished speaking, the room fell silent again. Karkaroff was momentarily uncertain. He had initially suspected Dumbledore wanted to wipe them all out on his turf. But Scamander's words seemed to make some sense. The Dark Lord's extreme followers were indeed capable of such a thing. Ludo appeared very anxious, his body shifting restlessly, muttering, the analysis makes sense. Maxim also fell into deep thought. It seemed that it wasn't the Hogwarts trickery she had imagined, trying to make their school's champions win, but rather that there was a real problem. Snape narrowed his eyes, glancing at Ralph. He was certain Ralph was behind it, but he didn't know if Dumbledore was involved. No, the headmaster must have been involved too. Harry and Ron exchanged a glance. If their spots hadn't come from Ralph, they almost would have believed it. But the Malfoys, could they really have been put in by the Death Eaters? After all, if Ralph could do it, they certainly could too, right? Since it's so dangerous, we have to cancel the Triwizard Tournament immediately, Fleur suddenly exclaimed. We also need to send ours to protect Ralph, their safety. Dumbledore sighed softly and shook his head. Miss Delacour, I'm afraid that won't work. We must abide by the rules. The rules clearly state that anyone whose name comes from the Goblet of Fire must participate in the Triwizard Tournament. It's all right, Fleur, Ralph reassured him. As long as I'm in Hogwarts, they can't do anything to me, but you still need to be careful, Fleur said worriedly. Shirley glanced at Fleur, then at Ralph, giving him a reproachful look. Ralph could only manage an awkward smile. I completely agree with Scamander. This is a Death Eater plot. A roaring voice suddenly came from the doorway, and Moody limped into the room, each step of his right foot making a loud thud. The Goblet of Fire is a very powerful magical object. To deceive it, to make it forget that only 3 schools are participating in the tournament, requires a particularly powerful confusion charm. Students can't do that, only a powerful Death Eater can. Moody's gaze first swept over Snape, then quickly settled on Karkaroff. And I happen to know that there's a real Death Eater here. Karkaroff was furious. He roared, are you doubting me, Alastair? Dumbledore warned, I have complete faith in all of you teachers here, you wouldn't do such a thing. Moody fell silent, but continued to glare at Karkaroff. Karkaroff's face was burning red. We don't know how this situation came about, Dumbledore said to everyone gathered in the room. But in my opinion, we have no choice but to accept it. But what about the wizards who have already graduated? Ludo asked. Since their names came from the Goblet of Fire, they must participate in the Triwizard Tournament, Dumbledore said. We will arrange matches for them, but to ensure their safety, the difficulty will be kept within a safe range. Minerva, Professor McGonagall approached, and the headmaster instructed, write to Malfoy and the others immediately, inviting them to Hogwarts for the Triwizard Tournament, saying that we are here to protect them from the Death Eaters. Remember, tell them that the Goblet of Fire is bound by a covenant. They can choose not to come, but if they do, they will bear the consequences. Yes, Professor Dumbledore. Professor McGonagall left immediately. Aside from these graduated wizards, Hogwarts also has 5 champions, Dumbledore said, then looked at Maxim and Karkaroff. Logically, we must put the Goblet of Fire back on and keep adding names until each school produces 5 champions. That would be fair. Maxim, no longer willing to let her students participate in the competition, quickly waved her hand, refusing. Actually, it's fine if Boxburton's only has 1 student participating, and the Goblet of Fire has just been extinguished. It won't be rekindled until the next tournament. It's alright, your school can choose 4 champions itself without the Goblet of Fire. Dumbledore smiled. MRS. Maxim, whether it's appointing champions, holding exams, or any other method, it's up to you. Like I said, Hogwarts guarantees fairness. Chapter 573 Moody's Practical Lesson. Tonight is destined to be an unforgettable night. Whether it's the Triwizard Tournament, restarted after 200 years, selecting a new champion, or the Goblet of Fire revealing the names of the Dark Lord and a host of Death Eaters, it's enough to make the attending wizards remember it for a lifetime. After calming down, Madame Maxim felt relatively alright. Dumbledore had already guaranteed the safety of Boxburton's students, Her only headache now was deciding which few troublemakers to send to the tournament. In contrast, Karkaroff was in a terrible state, his hands still trembling with excitement. He wasn't worried about the students' safety at all, their lives were none of his concern, but he feared the Death Eaters seeking revenge. Malfoy's claim of being controlled by the Imperious Curse was at most undignified, but Karkaroff had betrayed many of his colleagues back then. In layman's terms, he was a traitor. Within the Death Eaters, the punishment for traitors was terrifying. Karkaroff now desperately wanted to know who had orchestrated this conspiracy, secretly using Avada Kedavra to kill their opponent. In fact, not only Karkaroff, but later historians of magic, when studying this mystery, were also extremely curious about who manipulated the Goblet of Fire to select the Dark Lord and the Death Eaters as champions. Some suspected Voldemort, some speculated Karkaroff, and some even thought Dumbledore was the prime suspect. Of course, some also said that Ron Scamander was the mastermind, a view originating from Ron Weasley in his later years. He claimed that Ron helped him and Harry Potter become champions, and naturally, it was Ron who made the Death Eaters' names appear in the Goblet of Fire. However, the long-retired Quidditch star Crumb, in an interview, angrily denounced Ron, saying that he only deliberately smeared the great Scamander because he needed money, in order to sell new books and earn a meager pension. These two former champions engaged in a war of words in their later years. However, the general public largely shared Crumb's opinion. After all, how could the greatest wizard of all time, Ralph Scamander, do such a thief-crying stop-thief thing? It must be Weasley's slander. In any case, regardless of how it will be judged years later, tonight was indeed a great victory for the Hufflepuff students. After the dinner, Ralph followed the Hufflepuff students back to the common room. As soon as the boy entered the room, the little badgers, who had been quiet all along, could no longer contain their excitement and erupted in a deafening roar. Everyone came over to shake Ralph's hand and congratulate him on becoming a champion. Neville and Hannah somehow produced a sheet with a badger pattern on it, and they wrapped it around Ralph. Other young wizards went to the kitchen and brought out fragrant food for everyone to share as a supper. Not only Hufflepuff, but Gryffindor and Ravenclaw also held lively celebrations. Only Slytherin, the joy was theirs, and the little snake had nothing, remained the quietest house. They did indeed have warriors, more than any other school, but those warriors were all wizards like Lucius, who had graduated years ago. What a joke of celebration. Malfoy even wrote a letter overnight, questioning his father about why he had stolen his wife. The celebrations in the three houses only lasted a few days before they had to stop, not because the novelty wore off, but because the workload had become even heavier than in the previous weeks. In Transfiguration class, when everyone couldn't help but complain again, Professor McGonagall said sternly, "Your OL's exams are coming up soon. We don't take the OL's exams until 5th grade, Macmillan muttered. "We're only 4th grade now, to be precise. It's the first semester of 4th grade, already halfway over, practically halfway through 4th grade. Professor McGonagall's eyes gleamed authoritatively behind her square glasses as she declared, "At your level, if you don't start working hard now, you won't get the certificate at all, and this semester there's the Triwizard Tournament, and a lot of your energy will be focused on the competition, so we'll have to assign even more homework." Under this pressure, Defense Against the Dark Arts became the only course all the students looked forward to, because Professor Moody had said he would take everyone to the Forbidden Forest and magical creatures for hands-on practice. On Wednesday morning, after finishing herbology class, the Hufflepuff students, ignoring the mud on their clothes, hurriedly left the greenhouse and headed towards the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. Ralph, carrying his suitcase, entered the classroom and saw that the Ravenclaw students were already there. Shirley sat in the front row as usual, but to Ralph's surprise, the seat next to her was taken. Ralph walked over, raised his eyebrows, and asked in confusion, "Gabrielle, what are you doing here? Aren't you with your sister?" "My sister is in class," Gabrielle imitated Fleur, tossing her long silver hair and smiling brightly. "I came to find you." Ralph sat down in his chair and said softly, "But I have a class soon too. I can't play with you." "It's okay." Gabrielle shook her head proudly. "I specifically asked Professor Dumbledore, and he said I can audit any class, as long as I don't cause trouble and stay quiet. The teacher won't kick me out." Ralph was speechless now. Gabrielle was only 9 years old. It was unrealistic for her to audit a first-year class. He glanced at the girl with the ponytail again and asked, "What were you two talking about just now?" "We were talking about botricles," Shirley laughed. "Gabrielle was just asking me how to trim its overgrown nails." The girl with the ponytail raised her arm, and in her palm was a vibrant green botricle, its tiny brown eyes peeking out at Rove with fear. Rove didn't recognize the botricle. "Where did you get it?" he asked curiously. "It's mine," Gabrielle replied, her little face beaming with joy. "Rove, have you forgotten? Last year on the Mayflower, you gave me a seed, saying that if I planted it, 7 little botricles would grow next year, lining up to call me Big Sister." Ralph was a little embarrassed. He had indeed forgotten about it. But he had given her an earbud flower, which couldn't possibly grow into botricles. It seemed Fleur had gotten it for Gabrielle. What a good sister. Just then, Professor Moody strode in, his prosthetic leg making a thud on the ground. "Hurry up and come downstairs with me. Today is practical class. I'm taking you to the Forbidden Forest." The students excitedly stood up and headed out of the classroom, finally going to have a real fight with magical creatures. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 574, The Descendants of the Werewolves. The entire class excitedly followed Professor Moody, leaving the castle and quickly heading towards the Forbidden Forest. Walking at the back of the group, Shirley subtly glanced sideways, but Rove knew she was asking about Gabrielle's safety. He asked, "Gabrielle, we're going to the Forbidden Forest for class. Do you want to go back to the carriage in Box Buttons? Can I go with you to the Forbidden Forest, Rove?" Gabrielle looked at him pitifully, pleading, "I'll be good and won't cause you any trouble." Rove didn't directly refuse or agree, but calmly inquired, "There might be some bloodshed in this class. Are you sure you want to go?" With Rove's current abilities, he could naturally guarantee Gabrielle's safety in the Forbidden Forest, but the main concern was the content of the class, which might be unsuitable for children. "I'm sure," Gabrielle nodded vigorously. "When I was little, I lived with my mother in the Vila tribe for a while and saw the Vila hunting animals. I won't be afraid." Ralph chuckled softly. "You're still a child yourself." The little girl pouted, a little aggrieved and resentful, and said, "Ralph, I'm only 6 years younger than you. We're the same age. Don't always treat me like a child." Ralph was both amused and exasperated. Even the usually aloof Sherry was amused, her lips curving into a slight smile. The students quickly crossed the meadow and arrived at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, where they first saw Hagrid's charred cabin. In the clearing in front of the cabin, a large group of Gryffindor and Slytherin students were having a magical creatures protection class. Their task for the day was to lead the Blastales on a leash to help them digest their food. But it was hard to say who would lead whom, since the Blastales were already over a meter long, and every now and then, they would make a terrifying crackling sound and leap forward several meters. Ron was pulled to the ground by the Blastale, undergoing a sudden braking motion and getting a mouthful of mud. Ron finally managed to stand up, only to find his hair singed yellow by the flame spewed from the Blastale's rear. Ron cursed viciously, wishing he could steal some poisonous mushrooms from the greenhouse and kill the Blastale. Harry, standing nearby, didn't speak, but stared blankly into the distance. Ron asked, puzzled, "What's wrong, Professor Moody?" Harry said excitedly, "He seems to be taking the Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw students to the Forbidden Forest." Ron turned to look, his eyes filled with envy. Not only were they envious, but all the students in class were. Compared to playing with a Blastale here, going to the Forbidden Forest was indeed much more exciting and appealing. "Professor Moody, are you really going to the Forbidden Forest now?" Hagrid asked worriedly. "The Forbidden Forest has been very dangerous lately. Ever since he used 60 fire crabs to impregnate the Manticore, that creature had been extremely irritable, and no one could get close." Moody glanced at the Blastale, finding it more dangerous, but still said gruffly, "Don't worry, Hagrid, I'll only take the students to areas I have scouted. We won't venture too far into the Forbidden Forest." "Then be careful," Hagrid warned, "and, the Forbidden Forest is very deep, full of trees, and it's easy to get lost. If you can't find your way, you can ask Ralph, he knows the Forbidden Forest just as well as I do." Hearing this, Moody narrowed his eyes. Somewhat surprised, but then, remembering the Scamander name, it wasn't so strange. The young wizards looked at Ralph with shock. Weren't students strictly forbidden from entering the Forbidden Forest? How could he know it so well? Ralph, who was greeting Hermione, couldn't help but smirk. "Hagrid, you don't self-destruct like that." After some conversation, Moody bid farewell to Hagrid, and the group set off again, plunging into the forbidden forest along a narrow path that gradually disappeared into the depths of the dark woods. The scents of the forest immediately filled everyone's nostrils, the sharp aroma of fresh pine needles, the earthy fragrance of damp, decaying leaves, and a faint hint of animalic musk. The forbidden forest was like a beautiful woman veiled in black, usually restrained by Dumbledore, someone to be admired from afar but not touched. Now, able to lift the veil and enter her hidden realm to peek inside, the young wizards chattered excitedly. Only Ralph and Sherry remained calm. They had been here too many times. Who would feel excited entering their own backyard? Ralph even felt a bit disgusted with the forbidden forest, lacking the excitement and novelty of his first visit. In short, he was getting tired of it. It seemed it was time to explore new virgin forests. As they ventured deeper into the forbidden forest, the students felt as if they were in another world, towering trees everywhere, close together, blocking out the sunlight, a gentle breeze rustling the falling leaves. Curtains of fungi hung from the branches, enormous flowers bloomed in the muddy puddles, and half-submerged crocodiles swam in the swamp, looking like black logs with eyes and teeth. This place seemed more dangerous than a greenhouse. Deep in the forbidden forest, a long howl suddenly echoed, its tone rising and lingering, like a cold wind sweeping through the woods. Soon, the howls of wolves rose and fell. The excitement vanished abruptly, replaced by an unprecedented fear that overwhelmed the students. Moody stopped beside an oak tree covered in burls. He turned and asked, "Why did you stop?" "The wind, the rustling leaves, and the wolf howls. Which one has terrified you, Professor Moody?" Hannah trembled. "Is that the howl of a werewolf?" "I heard my father say that many werewolves live in the forbidden forest." Hearing this, the group grew even more terrified. "This question needs a professional to answer." Moody suddenly looked at Ralph and asked, "Scamander, Hagrid said you're very familiar with the forbidden forest. Are there werewolves living here?" "I haven't seen any real werewolves in the forbidden forest, but werewolf offspring do live here," Ralph said. "Is there a difference?" Justin asked. "Of course there is a difference," Ralph explained under everyone's gaze. "Usually, werewolf children are normal wizards, just like us. But if two werewolves mate in wolf form during a full moon, and the child becomes pregnant, the werewolf will give birth to a litter of real wolf pups. These pups cannot revert to human form, but possess intelligence equivalent to humans. I heard from my grandfather that a pack of highly intelligent wolves lives in the Hogwarts Forbidden Forest. They are all werewolf offspring. Intelligent wolves are still wolves." Ralph's words did not lessen the fear in everyone's hearts. Just then, Susan suddenly looked terrified, pointed into the distance, and let out a piercing scream. Chapter 575 Any mercy is cruelty to oneself. Hearing Susan's scream, everyone looked into the distance and glimpsed a thin figure hidden in the dense bushes. It was a huge, one-eyed gray wolf, its tail tucked low, its pale yellow eyes coldly scrutinizing them. On the ground lay the carcass of a monkey, its ripped belly steaming and reeking of blood and flesh. A monkey's head stared blankly at the sky, its cheeks torn open, revealing blood-red bone and empty eye sockets, its neck jagged and mangled. Beneath the carcass was a pool of congealed blood, shimmering with red and black light. Clearly, the huge, one-eyed gray wolf had just been feeding, its mouth still full of the blood flowing from its prey's soft belly. To the students' horror, as the wolf growled, 7 or 8 more wolves emerged from the bushes. The wizard's scent had awakened the wolves' hunger. Their eyes, in the dim light of the trees, gleamed with a frenzied light, fixed on their prey. The one-eyed gray wolf opened its mouth, red saliva dripping from its teeth, and howled towards the sky, letting out a terrifying howl. Immediately afterward, at the alpha wolf's command, the pack roared and charged towards the students, trampling over rocks, tree roots, and decaying leaves. The sudden turn of events terrified the young wizards. Some stood frozen in place, some screamed, others tried to retreat, only to slip and fall on the muddy ground. Of course, some students raised their wands, wanting to cast spells to attack the wolves. But what should have been simple spells became difficult to execute. Either the incantation was mispronounced or the casting motion went wrong. When they finally managed to cast a spell, it either hit tree trunks or fell to the ground, splashing up large chunks of dirt, failing to hit the agile wolves. Professor Moody didn't help. He simply watched each student coldly, occasionally intervening to catch those who tried to escape. Rolf didn't move either. A few wolves weren't enough for him. His assistant could handle them alone. Shirley raised her wand, the tip pointing at a boulder. With a transformation spell, it became a white wolf, which pounced on an attacking gray wolf. The two wolves tore at each other with their teeth and claws, sometimes separating, circling, then charging again. Shirley seized the opportunity to swing her wand again, shooting a red beam of light. The spell struck the other wolf's hind leg, and it howled and limped away. The girl with the ponytail attacked the other wolf, driving it away from her roommate. Gabrielle stared wide-eyed at Shirley. She had initially thought the girl was weak, but she was surprisingly powerful. The number of wolves was small, and the attack ended in just a few minutes. 4 wolves fled and disappeared into the bushes, 2 others lay on the ground, struck by the stunning charm, and 1 wolf lay bleeding from its belly, groaning in pain, clearly dying. Professor Moody limped over and said in a low, hoarse voice, "Some of you have surprised me with your performance. You seem to have received professional training." Moody's gaze lingered on Shirley for a moment, then he looked at the others and roared, "But most of you students greatly displease me. It's just a few wolves, yet you're so afraid, not even daring to raise your wands to attack them. I often say that a wand is a weapon, and its power depends on its wielder," Moody said in a gruff voice, "but that doesn't apply to some of you, because to you, a wand is nothing but a ridiculous wooden toy." Many lowered their heads, beginning to feel ashamed of their panic. "Now, 3 students, kill these wolves." Moody tossed down 3 daggers, then looked at the crowd and called out, "Neville Longbottom, Lisa Dupin, and Hannah Abbott." Everyone turned to look at them. Hannah hesitated for a moment, then mustered her courage and raised her arm. "What's wrong, Miss Abbott?" Moody asked. "Is there a problem, Professor Moody?" Hannah gasped, her voice trembling. "Those 3 wolves are already incapacitated. Why should we kill them? Is that so?" Moody sneered. He stepped on his prosthetic leg and walked towards a dazed wolf. As he approached, the wolf suddenly sprang to its feet, howling as it lunged at him. It turned out the wolf wasn't dazed, it had been feigning sleep to lure him in. Moody drew his wand with lightning speed. With a clang, the blue spell struck the wolf squarely in the abdomen. It fell to the ground, a sharp gash appearing on its belly, from which a torrent of blood gushed out. Hannah stared blankly at the scene. "This is the first piece of knowledge I'm going to teach you in this practical lesson." Moody's voice was like 2 saws rubbing together. "Wolves are cunning, but dark wizards are 1,000 times more cunning. Never easily judge whether an enemy is incapacitated. Always be vigilant." Moody urged again, "You 3, quickly pick up your daggers and kill the wolf." The 3 followed Moody's orders, picked up their daggers, and only after confirming that the wolves were incapacitated did they cautiously approach them. However, when it came to killing the wolf, they hesitated to varying degrees, especially Neville, who, looking at the wolf groaning in pain, found himself unable to bring himself to do it. This time, Moody didn't rush him, but slowly said, "When I was an Auror, I had a friend who was strong, intelligent, and studious, a hero of the training grounds. We all believed that one day he would surely become the most outstanding Auror. Then, during the Wizarding Wars, during a capture of Death Eaters, I watched my friend force an enemy to his knees and disarm him. But when he was about to finish off that dangerous Death Eater, he hesitated for a moment." Everyone listened intently. Professor Moody's face showed pain as he said, "On the battlefield, a moment is a lifetime. The Death Eater pulled a second wand from his sleeve and struck my friend in the chest with a killing charm. His magic, his strength, his bravery, all the skills he had acquired through arduous training, were worthless compared to the dog shit on the ground. Everything, all because he hesitated, when he should have struck." Moody looked at all the students, his eyes deep and cold, and he said in a hoarse voice, "This is the second piece of knowledge I'm imparting to you. Mercy and pity towards any enemy is cruelty towards yourself and your comrades." End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.